Evening. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, November 20th. We will get our meeting started here at 6:30 p.m. We will start with a roll call.
Newman. Here. Azar.
Here.
Chair Foster.
Here.
Showalter. Here. Brazen.
Here.
And Council Member Polika. Here.
We did hear from Councilman Zubakatani that she would not be with us this evening.
Motion to excuse.
And Commissioner Mashali
Support.
may just be tardy, so. You can continue with the motion to excuse.
Motion,
Yeah.
motion to excuse.
Oh.
Yes.
Support.
Motion by Brazen, support by Polika. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, next we have approval of the agenda. And this evening we have two public hearings on the agenda, one for the consideration of the CIP plan and another for our draft zoning ordinance recommendation. And that is Commissioner Michelle joining us. Thank you. At 6:32.
To accept the agenda as presented.
Motion by Polika, support by Brazen?
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, next we will move to approval of the minutes for consideration of approval of the October 30th, 2024 meeting minutes. Comments or a motion?
Motion to approve the meeting minutes from October 30th, 2024.
Support.
Motion by Showalter, support by Azar. All those in favor?
Aye.
Ask for me to shake notes.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Do you happen to have one of these for me?
Oh, there was a few of them up here we'll be sharing.
Oh, okay. Didn't know if we were, okay. We can share. I didn't know if we were given.
There are four up here.
Works.
Okay. Next, we'll have a call to audience. So if anyone would like to speak on any items other than the two public hearings that I've already mentioned on the CIP and the zoning ordinance, now would be the time to come to the podium to speak on anything other than the zoning ordinance and the capital improvement plan. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the zoning ordinance, so pretty much anything you have to say, we can talk about it during that public hearing if you want, or if it's completely unrelated, now would be the time. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can do that later. So we'll have a public hearing where you can speak, and I'll let you know exactly. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, well, so we will then move on to the public hearing portion of our agenda, and we're going to start off with the consideration to approve and recommend the City of Ferndale Capital Improvement Plan 2026 to 2031 to council for adoption. So we will start with an overview from city staff. Welcome. And then once we get an overview from city staff, we will open it up for a public hearing on the capital improvement plan, which we will recommend and will also go to city council after that. So thank you and welcome.
All right, thank you, Chair. For those who don't know me, I'm James Curzan. Ferndale. I know a good handful of you guys up there, but before we get into this, the capital improvement plan is a couple months long process, and it wouldn't be possible without a lot of effort from city staff, department directors, and then the CIP review team, which I'll acknowledge specifically later on in this presentation. So, quickly, quick refresher of our CIP policy and what we consider a capital improvement. This is any construction, expansion, or rehab of city that cost over $10,000 and has a useful service life of 3 or more years. All city vehicles that are bought or leased. Any purchase of city equipment over $10,000 with a useful service life of 3 or more years. And then we also consider studies. So any study that costs $10,000 or more and has a useful service life of 3 or more years is part of it. And also anything that costs over $25,000 and is not part of any other capital improvement program is part of its own capital improvement. So why do we do this? The city plans capital improvements to help the city understand our current and future capital needs, to better coordinate our projects so that we're not coming back and re-tearing up roads after we've done a water main project or redone the road and then come back and do a water main project. And then also to comply with the Michigan Planning Enabling Act and the Redevelopment Ready Communities Best Practices. We fund capital improvements through a variety of different ways, through bonds, either general obligation, revenue bonds, our Act 51 or our road funds, the gas tax that comes back to the city through the state. Tax increment financing, examples of these are projects that happen within the DDA. We sometimes also just use our general fund capital outlay, and also we use enterprise funds. So here we're talking our water and sewer fund, our auto parking fund, our sanitation fund, because that is separate from our general fund. So the next 6 years, because our capital plan is a 6-year plan, which is a RRC best practice. Our next 6 years, we have needs. We have $100 million requested in various capital projects over these next 6 years. This breaks out to a little over $57.5 million in the general fund, 4.5 in the road funds, 28 in our water and sewer, just over $1 million in our parking fund, and then we were planning on bonds at about $9 million. I could get into that one a little bit later, but that was originally intended for the Martin Road Recreation Facility, which we still plan to hopefully one day be able to do. Currently, we're not going to be able to do that. And this is another important thing that I'm going to get into. Just because the project is in this plan doesn't mean we have the available funds for it. So a couple highlights on that, on the planned capital improvements. I'm going to highlight our facility needs. This makes up about 15.5% of the general fund capital needs, and this doesn't include the actual replacement of any of these facilities. It includes a lot of renovations, looking at about 4.9 over the next 6 years, 4.9 million, with 2.7 of that coming in the next fiscal year. And these are needs. Again, doesn't mean we're going to be able to do them all. I also want to highlight some of our water and sewer needs. Specifically looking at our lead service line replacement program. We're going to need to spend about $15.6 million over the next 6 years to replace lead service lines for homes. And this is because of the state and federal mandates to replace these. That represents about 55.5% of the total water and sewer capital needs over the next 6 years. This, in addition to our water main improvement program to ensure we're not kicking the can down the road and we're able to provide clean, safe drinking water to our residents, that's $6.8 million over the next 6 years, equaling about 24% of the total. So, like I've been talking about, just because we put it in the plan doesn't mean we're able to fund it. So how do we prioritize these? Like I said, funds are limited. So to prioritize these, we utilize a CIP scoring matrix, which takes into account the project's impact on safety, its support for sustainability goals, its support for our city's equity goals, if there's any cost recovery, the impact on the community, the service area for the project, the impact on planned Ferndale goals, and then we also utilize our priority-based budgeting program scores. The priority-based budgeting scores are made up of these 5 attributes: the demand for the program, if there's a mandate to provide the program, the population that's served by the program, and then the cost recovery of the program, or if the community is relying upon the city itself to provide it, or if we can get it somewhere else. And on this slide, you can see we've listed out all the various CIP programs that are in this plan, along with their PBB score. And if you notice, the highest scoring ones are infrastructure, IT, building construction administration, so permitting, things like that. These are things that the city essentially has to do. And we can't, they're not wants, they're needs. So like I was saying, in this current fiscal year, this isn't in the plan, this is the current fiscal year. Last year, we received $4.7 million of capital requests, and we were only able to fund 2.86 million of that. So that works out to a funding ratio of about 60.8%. And you can see here the various things that actually were funded. Last couple years, pretty consistent with the amount that we're able to spend, somewhere usually around over $1 million. Not all get any higher than about 1.5 million, but it's what we're able to do. Unfortunately, deferring the maintenance, which is what pushing these capital projects off on is, deferred maintenance comes at a cost. If there's a potential safety hazard, it's going to increase that safety hazard. It's going to increase maintenance costs over time. And our DPW director estimates typically 10 to 20% every year is going to increase the cost for that project up to 600%. Smaller problems are going to become total system failures. And the cost to catch up with the maintenance work can cost hundreds, thousands, and even hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's going to reduce our effectiveness. Increased environmental impact. I'm thinking things like a generator. If you continuously push off that project, that instead of going to a more efficient generator, you're going to end up spewing more fumes into the atmosphere. Also, poor regulatory compliance. Again, thinking things like generators or underground storage tanks, things that if you keep pushing off, you're going to run into regulatory issues. And then also a lack of community trust. People aren't going to trust that you're going to take care of your assets. So examples, delaying repaving of roads is going to result in damage to vehicles because of potholes forming, roads failing. It can also lead to a need to completely reconstruct that road because you didn't do preventative maintenance, which is going to be much more costly than doing the preventative maintenance. Reduced inspection schedules on storm drains and sewers are going to lead to blockages, which can lead to water backups in homes, which nobody wants. I think we all remember some of the major rain events we've had here. And when building maintenance is deferred, the essential repairs are more costly. It's going to cost more to replace that HVAC system than it is to do in maintenance. So that's kind of the quick overview of this. I do want to do a big quick shout out to our 2024 CIP review team. We had Donnie Johnson, Greg Pollica, Krista Azar, Michael Olson from Deputy Director of Public Works, Logan Appleby, our Zero Waste Systems Manager, Riley Coleman, our Communications Specialist, Christine Ross, our Planner, Jamie Still, our Finance Manager, Dave Movilla from our City Clerk's Office, and then myself. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Went through a whole lot of information, a couple months worth of work in a very quick presentation, so I'm sure there's some questions.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I think we'll open it up for a public hearing first. So I will open the public hearing for the 2026 to 2031 City of Ferndale Capital Improvement Plan at 6:44. Seeing no one coming to the podium, I will close the public hearing at 6:44 and open questions and comments to the commission. And obviously, as we just saw, Krista Azar, one of our own, was on this committee. So if you would like to start, I'll
Just with a couple of comments. Again, a very organized effort, a very clear process. So people knew what was expected, came in prepared, and always like the part of the process where it ties back to our goals too. So it keeps the focus on not just, getting the job done. It's like, how does it impact the city? So uh, just, I support that it was another good year of organized planning.
Okay, well, thank you for participating. Councilman Polika, you were also part of that team. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think Commissioner Azar expressed it well. It was a very smooth, clean process.
Okay. Well, thank you as well for your time on that. Anyone else, questions for those that weren't engaged in the process? I do have one question as it relates to the Planning Commission. We saw in the past a plan to relocate DPW yard near the railroad, and I did see some costs in the plan that might be in conjunction with that, so I just thought if we had an update to that, I'd be curious.
It's still in the works. We're still, especially considering what's, transpired the last few weeks, we are still looking at options at what we can do. It's not so much moving the DPW yard itself, but the southwest storage yard. So where we, our leaf transfer station, if you will, also it's used for staging. We are still looking at potentially moving that.
If the funds are available. And so this would be in cooperation with that effort.
Yeah,
and-
absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right. Well, we always appreciate that the committee brings us great products and that we have folks engaged in the process, that we don't typically have too much feedback, and appreciate you giving us the update. And so if we don't have any questions or comments, what the city needs from us is a motion to recommend approval to the city council, where it will be reviewed again. Will there be a public hearing notice for that, or is this the only one in that process?
This is the public hearing for
That's
the.
what I thought. Okay, but it will be at the city council on an agenda. And that, do we know if that will be on Mondays or?
I was hoping to do Mondays, but I'll probably end up doing it the mid-December meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Motion to approve the capital improvement plan as outlined in the packet.
Second.
A motion by Showalter and a second by Brazen. Can I have a roll call vote, please? Excuse me.
Newman,
Yay.
Azar,
Yes.
Showalter,
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Muskelly,
Yes.
Councilman Polika,
Yes.
Chair Foster.
Yes, motion passes. Thank you, James. And to everyone who served on the project committee to get that in together. All right, next on our agenda, we have the consideration of a recommendation of approval of the draft zoning ordinance to city council. We will start with a presentation from city staff, and then open it up to a public hearing, and then to the commission for consideration. This will be a motion for approval. The city council will have the final word on the zoning ordinance. There will be 2 readings of that ordinance. I believe, Kyle, you might talk a little bit, you're already planning on talking a little bit more about the process, but I want to just make sure it's clear what our process will be here today. And with that, I'll leave it to you.
Good evening, planning commissioners. Like the chair said, this is just to review the zoning ordinance, hold a public hearing for any kind of public feedback, and then consider a recommendation of approval to the city council. So this will go, should they, move to recommend approval, it will go to an upcoming city council meeting. We can talk about that in a little bit. So this is an ongoing process. It's been about, I think, 19 months that Roger said. So we've had quite a bit of feedback, quite a bit of discussions. The last time we were here was October 2nd, where we held a joint meeting with the city council. So we we had some public comment. It was not a formal public hearing like tonight is, but we were able to get some feedback. We also held a open house preceding that meeting. So we have come back with a revised plan. So this includes some edits from what we heard from that night, as well as some other housekeeping edits that we discovered throughout the process. So I'm going to turn it over to our Laura from McKenna. That's Laura Ha. She's going to go through some of these slides. These are pretty similar to what we saw at the October 2nd meeting, but it's important stuff, and for anybody who's new or just joining us, it's still really good for them to view. So she's going to run through this. I'll probably hop up again near the end.
Thank you. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Evening, Commissioners and Councilman Polika. My name is Laura Ha, as Kyle just introduced me, and it's a pleasure to be back before you this evening. We will run through this brief presentation, just kind of giving a snapshot of the process, highlighting how important housing is in the zoning code update, and then summarizing what we've heard through the public engagement and how those translated to key changes, and then discussing some next steps and answering any questions. All right, so as we discussed at that joint Planning Commission and City Council meeting in October, zoning has historically, at least in the U.S., in the past 100+ years, been used to really separate uses. And that really stemmed from this need for public safety, for public health, to not have industrial next to residential. And over the years, especially within the last 10, 15, 20, there's been this kind of resurgence to take a look at our land regulations and make sure that they are promoting development and quality of life in an equitable, in a sustainable, and an inclusive manner. So a lot of communities have started moving towards updating, reforming their zoning code in order to remove some of these exclusionary practices. And this has been a wonderful opportunity that the city of Ferndale has undertaken to correct some of its current standards in the code to make the city more inclusive, sustainable, and equitable. And when we look at communities, even across Michigan, Ferndale is not alone in this endeavor to modernize its code. Just on the screen are a couple communities across the state and out of state that have really revised their entire codes to make their communities more inviting, walkable, and vibrant. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the zoning reform that the Michigan Association of Planning has really been undertaking in the last 2 years. There's a lot of great resources that are available through the association. They just came out this fall with the zoning reform stories. I'll leave this with Kyle if anyone's interested. It's available on the website too, but it is a really helpful document because it highlights 100 communities across Michigan that have already taken this proactive approach to zoning reform in order to make housing more inclusive. So there's a lot of other communities across the state that are already starting to do this work. So Ferndale can celebrate that it is one of those communities as well. Now, the foundation for starting a complete zoning ordinance overhaul or rewrite is really to have a up-to-date master plan that guides the path forward. It sets the foundation, and Ferndale was on the right track with that. You adopted a new master plan in 2022, the very end of 2022, and then after that moved into updating the zoning code, because that master plan and that future land use map really is the foundation for how to approach a zoning code rewrite. So a lot of the goals and objectives in your master plan drove the regulations that are in this draft before you today. In particular, there was a great deal of public engagement that went into your master plan process. And the top priority that participants through that master plan process identified was affordable housing as the highest development priority for the city moving forward. So that's why there is such a focus on housing in this zoning code, or one of the reasons. Another reason is the adopted 2020 Community Affordability and Inclusive Housing Action Plan. There was also a great deal of community engagement that went into the creation and adoption of this plan, where the recommendations specifically, those strategies are to modify the zoning code to increase diversity of housing stock, to increase the amount of housing types that are permitted, and to make it more accessible and affordable. And when we look at this process, there was also a great deal of public engagement that occurred over these last almost 2 years now. The first was that there was a designated steering committee that was established to help guide this process and act as ambassadors in the community. There were also ongoing meetings with the city administration. In terms of the specific civic outreach, there were 4 themed workshops that occurred last summer in 2023, and this was supplemented by a dedicated project website which had online engagement as well. And when you take a look at the entire calendar of different meetings and events that have been held, there's quite a few on the screen. There are multiple in-person events. There was the online presence. The city did targeted mailers, information in the newsletters. And then this was also discussed, the zoning code and its themes were discussed at so many different public meetings throughout this time span, not just the Planning Commission. It was discussed with the joint meetings with the Commission and City Council, the DDA, and other bodies of the city. So there was a lot of outreach in that respect. And then the Planning Commission, you took this even further by this past summer and fall, really breaking out the different chapters and articles of the proposed code and doing some subcommittee groups to take a real deep dive in these sections and take ownership over some of them. So this has been a very thorough vetting process. This is draft number 6 that we are on today. We'll go briefly through just some housing stats in Ferndale that kind of highlight the need for some of these recommended provisions in your code. So the first is that when we take a look at the amount of single unit versus multi-unit housing in the across the city, you can see orange is the city of Ferndale, the yellow middle bar is Oakland County, and then green is the entire Southeast Michigan. Ferndale has a much greater percentage of single unit dwellings as compared to multi-unit. So expanding that diversity and giving that choice, making it more inclusive for residents is important. When we look at Ferndale's housing stock, it is on the older end of communities in Michigan. It's actually the 11th oldest housing stock in a Michigan city. The median age is 1944, and the first recorded zoning in the city goes back to 1968. So what this means is that a lot of housing stock that's out there today that you cherish, that creates your neighborhood character and the blocks that you love, was constructed prior to the first zoning. So when we take a look at, like on the screen here, a triplex and a quadplex, those are 2 existing structures within the city today. There is a diversity across blocks, and there's a number of residential buildings like these that are already interwoven into your neighborhood fabric. And the goal of this code is to continue developments like these that fit in with the character. There's also some demographic changes that mean there's a greater need for housing across the city. So fewer people per household means more dwelling units in order to accommodate the same number of residents across the city. And we also know that a quarter of Ferndale households are considered housing cost burdened. So the proposed regulations in here really are designed to try to increase housing supply and make more accessible for all income levels. But that's not to say that there's not provisions in the zoning code to still protect that scale, character, and cohesion of the neighborhood, mostly done with the form-based sections that would apply to the triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, and the other mixed-use buildings. As I mentioned before, there were the 4 public engagement events last summer around those dedicated themes that were identified by council at the start of this project. And so we've grouped some of these key findings of what we've heard and how that translates into the zoning changes based on each of those 4 themes. So for housing in neighborhoods, we heard that the value of housing diversity and a mix of home sizes is important. To allow property ownership to build equity and increase affordability. We heard that residential neighborhood character is important to maintain, that is something that is unique to Ferndale and needs to be preserved, and to minimize impervious surfaces, reduce or minimize flooding. So how has that been accomplished? The permitted housing types across districts has been expanded while the districts have been simplified. There's been an expansion of accessory dwelling units. The planned unit development eligibility criteria includes provisions for a certain number of accessible or affordable housing units. There's design guidelines for residential to maintain that neighborhood cohesion. And there's been some additional standards that would limit the impervious surfaces across neighborhoods. Through sustainability, we heard that it was very important to increase the tree canopy and green spaces, to expand EV infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure, to reduce parking minimums, and to increase mixed-use development opportunities so that the community maintains its walkability. So in order to do that, provisions in the code have been added for native species and plant diversity requirements. The landscaping section overall was completely revamped. There are EV requirements now for new development, standards for permeable pavers, solar and wind energy. There's been a lot of added flexibility regarding parking, including removing the parking minimums into a guidebook that's a separate document, and the creation of the mixed-use districts 1 and 2, which allow for housing as well to still increase those housing options across the city, but provide some more flexibility. The third theme was the downtown design. Here, the public, what we heard was to enhance transitions into neighborhoods for commercial areas, those edges where the two seem together. To support local businesses and allow for easier reoccupancy and reinvestment, so streamlining processes and making regulations clearer. To better integrate parking structures into the streetscape and block, and to make it easier for businesses to have outdoor dining as an amenity. So in the zoning code, there were increased screening requirements for commercial transitions into neighborhoods. There's been flexibility added for smaller local businesses in different sections, parking, signage, etc. There's requirements for parking structures and how they must be designed to fit in with the streetscape, and then reduced red tape in several sections. And then lastly, the fourth theme of equity and accessibility. Themes that we heard from the community were to improve access for pedestrians and persons with disability, to expand biking infrastructure, and to make housing more inclusive, reducing barriers to entry. And what that translates is stronger requirements for accessible access, outdoor dining, etc., stronger barrier-free parking requirements, bicycle parking standards, and the expansion of housing unit types. And since we last met in October, we have made further changes to the zoning code, which which are included in this draft 6 that's before you tonight. That, Kyle, did you want to go over these, or would you like me to continue? Yeah.
Thank you. And while you're switching up there, I just want to apologize for the interruption. My notifications are designed so if family calls me multiple times in a row, I'll ring through. It is on silent, so I apologize for that. All right, thanks, Kyle.
Thank you again, Laura, for that recap. That was really great. So this draft contains a few updates, so it is a little different from what we were looking at the October 2nd meeting. In terms of changes to the zoning map, the main change that we did was we reviewed what we were doing with our existing P parking zonings. So we have a number of these parking zoning parcels throughout the city. I think there's around 25-ish of them. They're typically kind of at the end of a neighborhood. There are lots of people who own a house in a P-zoned lot, and they have no idea. It's really interesting. I talked to a few of them personally through this process. We first proposed in the zoning map the last time around to change those to MXD1 for neighborhood mixed use. It is kind of like a lower intensity commercial. We did some discussions among ourselves and also based on feedback from, residents, we decided to soften that a bit and modify all of these to just whatever the adjacent residential district is, which is, for most of them, R1. There are a few other minor changes. One example is a site that is a former industrial site, and by Eagle standards, it cannot be used for anything other than industrial. So we did address that. There are a few other kind of, typos, I guess, that you could say we caught in a few places around the city, and we were able to make these modifications. In terms of zoning ordinance updates, there are a number of formatting and cleanup matters, so these are little minor things here and there. We spruced it up with some additional definitions, such as, green space, facade, and loft. We've clarified that we are counting ADUs as a unit when we're looking at unit counts throughout the city. We have clarified that anything with 3 or more units on a residential site requires stormwater management through Oakland County standards. We have noted that permanent equipment is required to go in the rear yard with exceptions. So if you have equipment in your side yard, it can remain there and it can be replaced there. But for new permanent equipment, it does have to go in the rear, but there are some exceptions. You can work with the CD department on that. Per Councilmember Polika's comments, we've revised our front yard setback for residential to use an average. We have a placeholder for our future tree ordinance, which is something that we've been quite discussing heavily with the city attorney about and council. We've clarified some food truck and trailer residential storage. So as it stands right now, you can store your food truck on your site, provided that you are not encroaching into the right-of-way. We've taken the parking guidebook recommendations, moved them as a separate document. This is one of Roger's big recommendations. There was a big discussion about adult businesses at our meeting on October 2nd. We have specified those as special land uses only, and they also have specific use standards, which includes buffer distances from other such types of businesses. And to Commissioner Showalter's point, we have clarified that the building type materials are in addition to the chart that precedes them.
Can I ask a couple clarifying questions on some of those?
Sure.
So, like for the placeholder for a future tree ordinance, do you have an estimation on timing on that?
We don't at this time. Roger, do you have anything else to report? We don't. It's
That's coming from city council and they're engaged and we're working with the city attorney to clarify all that language. Okay.
Yes.
And then similarly, the parking guidebook recommendations, if those are being removed as a separate document, will we see those in the future or how will that be?
So that's also in the packet. It's in the agenda as a separate link. So that will be a separate document that's kind of pulled out of the zoning ordinance. Those are the parking recommendations. I can let Roger speak to that in a little more detail if you'd like, either here or now.
Through the chair. Question, so you said now the front yard setback is used average. It still lists 15 feet on section 208.
There should be a footnote, I believe.
In the secondary education's chart prior to those,
Okay.
we might just have to clarify
Yeah,
what
we
we're
might-
looking to,
If you're
additional
looking
footnote.
just at the graphic, it is in conflict then.
Are these printed before or after those alterations? Printed copies.
These are printed after, so I think that's, Roger said he noted that.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay. Yep, thank you. Um, okay.
We have one update since this was published, so this is not in the Zone Ferndale draft, it's not in the update before you. This is addressing double fencing. This came from council. There's a large concern about double fencing and how that can be a harbor for rodents. So we have broken out the location of where fencing can be, and we have included language stating that no fence can be installed side by side by another existing fence unless this requirement is waived by the CED director for a good cause. So. I just want to do a quick thank you for everybody who has helped us get through this process. I know we still have plenty to talk about, plenty to discuss, and there's still city council consideration. So by no means we're at the end, but I still want to take the opportunity to recognize everyone on city council, everyone on planning commission, and of course our steering committee, which is composed of a lot of different people. It's composed of elected officials. It's composed of residents who serve on our boards and commissions, and it's composed of just private residents who were interested in the process. And I think it's pretty great to note that everyone on this page is a resident, you know, even if they work for the city. So I think we're pretty blessed to have that, and I think that's really, really interesting. In terms of the next steps of our process procedurally, so the Planning Commission may consider a recommendation tonight. We have a tentatively scheduled first reading on Monday. Should that recommendation get moved tonight? So that is a time for City Council to go over and review it themselves and make any final comments or edits or changes that they wish to make. And then there will be a planned second reading and adoption December 16th. That's the only council meeting in the month of December.
All right, so a couple things on that. One, there were some noted edits, kind of minor edits to the text for the zoning ordinance, and we may have some additional ones here tonight. As the first reading is November 25th, I assume that we'll have the same kind of presentation, identify those specific edits that people might not have had time to process or edit. If we have any continued edits here, I think my understanding is that we'll also discuss them kind of like you had just done in a presentation, but not necessarily get them in the actual text prior to Monday night's reading, but certainly before the second reading and adoption. Is that correct?
That is correct. So, you know, anything that is discussed tonight or anything that we choose to move forward with these edits tonight, it will not be in a new version for Monday, but we will recap any kind of changes just like I just did. And then at the second reading, that will be a final version.
Of this version, yes. Another point on that in just a moment, but going back to the parking guidebook. So that is separate from the zoning ordinance. Like procedurally, are we adopting that as well, or how is that meant to be?
Sure. So, you know, one of the things we heard from some people was loosening parking regulations, but obviously that's a great concern for the community. It's kind of a scary topic. So what we did is we broke it out of the code and made it a recommendation book. But for anybody to receive approval, they need to come to the CED department and get a letter of parking sufficiency based on that. So if they follow the recommendations, which are just taken out of our current code, then they would get that letter, right? 1 space per 200 square feet for retail. If they have 1,000 square feet, they're providing 5 spaces, they would get it if they meet it. If they don't, they need to provide a parking study, shared parking agreement, any justifications for why they might need a little less parking. For example, senior apartments, you know, a lot less parking demand. So they would need to provide that and get approval. If at any point, I think is written in there that the CD director can direct it to Planning Commission to review and approve.
Okay. So we do not need to approve that separately. It is for our review, and then if we have any comments on it for edits. However, we're only making a recommendation on the actual zoning text, and this is just a supplementary guidebook that we are not approving.
Correct, but I think all the parking standards were taken. I don't know that we changed anything. But do we update them based on, what specifically do we update? Laura can answer. Maybe there was some best practice. I know some, the EV charging things changed. I don't know what specifically changed.
Okay. And then just kind of on all these comments of, edits, and we'll continue to find things. It is a very long document, and it's been a very long process over 19 months. This is our sixth edit. And this is not a new thing. We've been updating our zoning ordinance over time, and is meant to be a living document. And so I just want to note that you said, our final text for, the second reading, but it's never a final text. There's always the opportunity to edit the zoning ordinance as we move forward, as we find things that we might want to change. This is a very big overhaul, and we can expect that we will have edits over time. And so even after this, next step in the process will be to, I think, kind of carve out a specific time, like 6 months ahead, that we will make sure that we are staying on top of the ordinance to kind of do a debrief of how is this working, is there anything that's not working that we might need to edit. So I just want to mention that as part of the process as well, that this is something that can always change, and that we're always seeking feedback on. Although, to that point, I will seek everyone's feedback from the room this evening in a public hearing on the matter, unless we want to talk about that parking real quick, or anything else that you wanted to add on, Laura, before we open the public?
The parking standards were modernized. Some of them were quite antiquated. So they have been aligned with best practices from the Transportation Institute of Engineers and also ULI's guidebook for parking, the most recent additions. So that should help serve the community well, and the EV standards were also added to that table. But to use it as a guidebook is at least a flexible model, so you can adjust those more easily when new best practices are made aware.
Mm-hmm. So our previous guidelines were based on a former edition of the Transportation Engineers Guidebook, or whatever the official title is. I'm pretty sure from my understanding of it, I'm sure things were updated over time, and so basically just updating to the standard and to new standards. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, with that overview, I will open up the public hearing for consideration of a recommendation of approval of the draft zoning ordinance at 7:18. And now would be the time for anyone to, if they would have any comments on zoning in general. If you want to step to the podium and introduce yourself.
Hi, Mindy Couples. I live on East Marshall Street. A little concerning to me. I understand that there's going to be a separate guidebook for parking, but where is that going to be available so that people can, I guess I don't understand, before it'd be like if we build an apartment, they have to have one parking spot per unit. If it's, a flat, they have to have 1.5 parking spots per level. So where is that direction? Where can we see that?
Mm-hmm. We can answer that. We might as well answer that too, just in case anyone else has any comments, actually. Because I believe that the answer is that there's still standards within the zoning ordinance, but then there's also a guidebook that supplements those standards. Okay, we'll pull it up after your comments. So if you have anything further, and we'll make sure to answer that. Do you have anything else you wanted to bring up, Mindy? Thank you so much. Well, we can, so we'll make sure to address that. Welcome.
I'm Michael Purdy, 360 Academy. I have a little concern about the code moving forward on, seems to be we're in, I don't know, I don't know how to explain this. So for years I've been doing gardens. I have a lot of gardens in my front yard. Everybody loves them. I have hundreds of people stop by. I have a lot of big trellises and things going on, and quite a few newspapers and things like that. I've been recently made aware of a change in this new zoning thing for the 10 by 10 by whatever triangle on the driveways that has to be free and clear of obstructing potential accidents with pedestrians. While I understand the need for something like that, that takes away 50% of my front yard, and I'm only surrounded by one driveway. If somebody else had two driveways, you know, surrounding their house, that would take care of up to 50 or more % of their front yard for the potential to save something that doesn't even generally happen in this city. It seems to go against the master plan of more trees, more bushes, more green-friendly, more diversity in the housing stock, more character, more all of those things. That one little rule will decimate what I do. And it's extremely important to me. I know that Roger had called me, and nice to meet you, sorry. If I was rude the other day on the phone, I did the other day on the phone. But I was heated at the moment and going to work. It's something that I've been doing for a decade, and everybody seems to love it. I have seemed to have one person somewhere that has said, we don't like this. I also want to bring that up, as I don't see that that's a fair thing to have one person be able to decimate your lifestyle and or your life and do that. I think there needs to be more of a discussion in the city about what happens with those types of things. And I can be more respectful too sometimes. We all have our guilty, you know, of being a little bit more rude on the phone and things like that. But this is a huge deal for me, and this seems to go exactly against what Ferndale is about. I moved here 17 years ago to be part of a quirky, fun community. That's being stripped from us because we can't do this, we can't do this. It makes us all cookie-cutter homes at this point. And I get the potential accident and safety, and that's fine, but it's an unnecessary rule that never happens. And for that to happen, you're taking away how many hundreds and hundreds of trees and bushes and landscaping from everybody's yard. If I have to play by the rules, so does everybody else. So that means all of these people are going to have to rip down things that are in their yard that have been there for potentially decades. We need at least to discuss maybe a grandfather clause or something that we aren't messed with because we have things that are already going on. You know, and you can't expect in this economy, especially, for people to spend thousands of dollars to rip things out and redo these things because of a that are short enough to cause those types of obstructions for you pulling out of your own driveway and causing an accident. This is not something that is a street. So I think that should be considered too.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you. And just, I know you said earlier that this is your first time, so I just want to we'll address comments after the public hearing. I'm not sure if, I just want to make sure. All right, thank you, welcome.
I'm Dominic Scapitici, La Prairie Street in Ferndale, and I would just like to second that Michael's garden is beautiful. I'm an admirer. Yeah, I have a friend that lives near you. It's wonderful. And I guess I didn't catch what he caught, but or what? Yeah, I didn't catch it. And then I was just thinking, I have like a Mary garden right by in my front yard, closer to the sidewalk, and it's between my driveway and my walkway. And now I'm thinking, oh gosh, there's no other driveways near me because I have a double lot, but that maybe is an issue. But then the giant pine tree on the apartment building next to my property, that is on the very corner of the property, right next to my driveway. Now I'm like, that probably shouldn't actually be there because I almost hit people every time I go out of my driveway on that side. But I don't know. Thank you for bringing that up because it's something I never really had put together. I guess I was going to say thank you for listening at those last meetings that we had about this. There were topics that brought up that I know I had brought up it was at Incabiso there on things, and then the meeting that followed, another resident brought up, and I was happy to see it looks like they're being addressed. One of those being like stormwater. I'm still a little nervous. I would love if we did a little stronger than what Oakland County's minimum is, because you know, I don't know where you fall on the climate change thing, but it's changed. So I just advocate maybe we do a little bit stronger. Things do flood more. I mean, and it kind of stuck in my head. I went to our new park, renovated park, Wilson Park, yesterday to walk my dog, and it was like a little drizzly. That most of the sidewalks were already flooded there. So that's another commission thing. But I just wanted to say thank you for actually listening to us a bit. I will say, I will kind of repeat this again. I'm very much for single family zoning. You know, I'm a child of an immigrant and was kind of worked hard all my life with that mentality to have like a single family property that when I got married, I married my husband almost 5 years ago. We decided this home in Ferndale is where we're going to live out our lives. Picked it because it was a single family zoned neighborhood. There's a lot of green open space where I live. And, you know, it's one of those quality of life things I saw mentioned in the presentation, or one of the folks mentioned. It's also kind of the quirky thing with Ferndale. Like, one of the reasons my husband and I like to live here is it is a little offbeat area. Where I live in the city, everyone has really big yards, deep lots, and these zoning changes, it's probably going to be that area that changes the first in the city, because that's where people are going to easily build these fourplexes that are going to wholesale be built. And, you know, I get change is going to happen, but I would love for you guys to come in my backyard, and you can just see this long strip of mature trees, and it's lungs. They're green lungs for our city. It's a green area that absorbs water. I'm not against apartment buildings and multi-unit. I bought a house next to an apartment building, you know, so if I was against that, I wouldn't have done that in the first place. But a lot of that water and runoff comes, you know, into our green areas in our yards. And I know we're going to put in cisterns under buildings or impervious spaces, and that is all well and great, but those things fail. Those things require upkeep. Those things require code inspectors. And this is going to get me to another little thing, is that maybe with what happened with this last election and us not passing some tax increases, that maybe we slow this process down just a bit, because until we as a city kind of see where we are financially. And I bring that up because all of these things, these are a lot of codes and a lot of information. As a city, without money, how are we going to oversee this, maintain this, and keep this going? I'm not saying that we get rid of all this stuff, but maybe slow it down on our decision making, like the deadlines or the scheduled decision making, because of that, or with that in mind, just so we're not like ahead of, or too far ahead and not able to do any of these things, or not properly maintain them or see them through. Another shout out I like too about this, it did address things like accessibility for people that have different ways of accessing houses and living in houses and stuff. I appreciate that that's in there. I thought that was a good thing. So I wanted to say some positive stuff for a change. But also just,
Thank you, Dominic.
Again, our green lungs for the city, trees, open space, we're pretty dense already. I just love always that to stay in our minds of preserving that. So thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, welcome.
Hi, Jenny Beaker. I'm a resident of West Lewiston. I am also the DDA director and was part of the steering committee. So first of all, just shout out to this process. I think it was really interesting, informative, and engaging for the public. I know on behalf of the downtown area, we learned a lot about what people want, and it gave us a lot of input on what we can do moving forward. So thanks to everyone who participated and engaged people with this process. I did have some questions about the double fence clause that's just a little bit new for me as a resident. I have the former neighbors installed a wooden fence with the smooth side facing their property and the rough side facing mine, which I understand as like I guess the existing ordinance. And I'm curious what the double fencing would allow or prevent me from being able to do with that existing fence, and also what that would mean for my neighbors on the other side who currently share an open yard. If I wanted to get a dog and know they have a dog, what would fencing look like for us as we move forward? Would they be stuck with whatever I do, kind of like I'm stuck with what my former neighbor has done?
Thank you. Appreciate that. And thanks for being a part of the process. Everyone. But for being on the steering committee. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, Michael Larry. I am resident 884 Silman Street and also Director of Special Events for the City of Ferndale. And I wanted to bring up concerns I had in regards to food trucks. As Special Event Director, as you know, part of the special events is that I oversee the process of approving food trucks. And that not only for special events, but also when a special event with a private business wants to have a food truck for an event they've taken that's held in their facility. And so some of the concerns I had to do with Section 5.11 of the mobile vendors section. And I wanted to be mindful of these things, and that is that when you have a food truck that is placed on a private property, that should we be considered or concerned about how close they are to a residential neighborhood. And I can give you an example that we have a food truck that's at a gas station at Woodward Heights and Hilton Road. And there's a cinder block wall that separates the food truck from the residential home. So I would be concerned about whether or not that we need to be mindful about how close they need to be because of the noise. Because even though you have a noise ordinance in the city, if a food truck is allowed to be open until 2 a.m. in the morning, is that still going to be too loud for a resident who's trying to go to sleep? So that's one of my concerns. And then the other concern I have is whether or not we need to make sure that in the process that we're considerate of the idea of whether or not a food truck is there for temporary reasons or for a long-term reason. And what I mean by that is when you have an event, let's say a local establishment for a special event that's only for one night, let's say that they're having a wedding. So they're renting the facility to do their private event. So they want to have a food truck because this establishment doesn't have food services. So they want to only be there for 4 hours. So we want to be able to allow them to maybe park in front of the establishment on private public space. But with that, what are we requiring for those? Because we have jurisdiction over public space. So we want to make sure and be mindful that that they are valid with their health code license, that we want to make sure that their fire code's safe, so that they have a suppression system if they are cooking in their food truck. Because unfortunately with special events, sometimes you have food trucks that come into Ferndale and they're not in compliance. And our attentive fire department make sure that they are. And sometimes we have to tell them to cease and desist and go away because we don't want an unfortunate mistake or accident happening. So we need to be mindful that regardless of whether they're on private property or public space, that is something that is required. Another thing that we need to make sure is that they're not in violation of the Oakland County Health Department requirements, and that they also have a liability insurance policy so that unfortunate mistakes happen, not saying it would be, on purpose, but if someone gets food poisoning, who's going to be liable for that? We need to make sure that the person who owns the food truck and who's preparing the food is liable, so they must have a valid liability insurance for that coverage so that we or the private property owner are not the ones who are stuck with with trouble, because somebody's going to have to take responsibility for that person who's sick. Another thing we need to make sure of is to be mindful that if there is a food truck that is allowed to be on private property, which means that they have it's a decision between the food truck owner and the private property owner, that even though they're there for a long-term duration, let's say that they're there for, for the whole summer, that I don't think it's realistic to expect them to remove everything and then depart at the end of the night. Because now you're asking someone who owns the food truck to have more than one person to remove everything, put it up in either the food truck or whatever other vehicle they have. Let's say they have seating and a table, and to move it and then have to bring it back the next day. I don't know if that's realistic to ask or require something of that, especially if we're going to allow them to be there more than for one night for a special event. Whereas if it's on public space, I'm more concerned about, again, noise ordinance concerns, is whether or not you have a food truck that's settled there and we're allowing them to be for a long-term duration, let's say for May to November, which would be long-term, or I would consider annual, versus a temporary, which would be someone who is only there for a special event at a particular establishment for a day, that we need to be mindful of that. Nothing's ever simple, I know, but being that, in my position, I have to look at these because I do process food trucks as it is currently. So I do see the challenges of all of these stipulations. So I don't think it's as simple as just it's black and white. There's always a gray. And with food trucks, we need to be mindful that there is a gray situation here. And we have a lot of food trucks that are owned by minorities, and this is their business, and we need to be considerate of the fact that we're trying to help them do business. And with what we have currently, we need to be mindful of where we are currently. And this is separate from special events because we already had that policy already set up for them. So this is really about special events for private businesses who need someone just for a special event at their location versus a private or private property that wants to have a food truck there for a long-term presence. And be mindful of the noise ordinance and also that long-term presence on whether or not they should or should not even have seating arrangements, or whether it should be just encouraged as a pick up and go.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Alan Hale, 1903 Woodward Heights. Also a native lawn enthusiast, and I'm curious about your comments regarding the former gentleman's concerns. I'm also the chair of the Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Commission, and I'm really looking forward to this ordinance or the zoning update going through. We had I've told my story a few times, but my wife is a wheelchair user, and for us to live in Ferndale when we bought our home in 2015, I always have flashbacks when I hear about kind of our housing stock in Ferndale. It took us 6 to 8 months of searching for a house, looking at 4 to 5 houses a week between Ferndale and Oak Park to find something that was barrier-free or could even be made barrier-free. So we looked at, if you bought a house in 2015 in Ferndale, chances are we looked inside of it. But we don't have a community of housing stock that is ready for folks to age in place. We don't have a community that has housing stock that's welcoming for a lot of people with disabilities. A lot of the changes being proposed in this are going to take a long time for us to see the impact for. So when we talk about maybe the need to wait, this is kind of one splash that's going to cause ripples over years and decades that'll start to change kind of the tide of what's available in Ferndale. More recently, the story is my wife is pregnant right now, and we have our in-laws are coming from Baltimore to help support us, and they're looking for a 4-month short-term rental, and nothing was really available in Ferndale. And that was even with help from reaching out to the DDA and others for connections. The best quote we got was $2,500 a month for a 4-month deal, and that's also even the place that we could visit. It doesn't have to be fully accessible, but just a place that my wife could visit when we hopefully have a newborn on our hands. So I just want to make the comment that I'm excited for kind of the changes coming and what this is going to mean for accessibility in Ferndale. And I want to thank everybody involved who's gotten us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations. Anyone else?
Dave Cottrell. It is addressed to Chair Foster. Thank you for all your listening, coordination, and work. I may not be able to get to the planning meeting tonight, Wednesday, November 20th. My main concern about zoning is the splitting of a R1 house into a duplex. There are very few houses in Ferndale the size that a modern family wants. 3 or better 4 bedrooms. 1 bedroom for boys, 1 for girls, an office, and 1 for the parents. Friends in the 20s or young 30s move out to Saline, Beverly Hills, and Farmington Hills to get such houses. With each R1 house converted into a duplex, we get less homes for modern families and less children on the street. More moms have to arrange play dates for the kids. In Saline, the kids walk outdoors and play. We need to increase the number of homes with 4 bedrooms. Dave Cottrell.
Thank you.
I have a rather lengthy one from a person, Councilor Mayor Pro Tem Mikulski, and she says she was hoping to come out tonight. It's not here, okay. She was hoping to come out tonight and share the information below, but she needs to be on call, and would we be willing to read it? Changing R1 zoning from single-family housing to allow quadplexes is a significant policy shift that could have unintended consequences, particularly when viewed through the lens of Ferndale's unique housing and environmental challenges, as outlined in the Community Affordability Inclusive Housing Action Plan and the Stormwater Vulnerability Assessment. While increasing housing density is a well-intentioned response to affordability concerns, it's essential to evaluate whether such changes align with the city's long-term goals for sustainability, inclusivity, and infrastructure resilience. From an infrastructure perspective, Ferndale stormwater systems are already under significant strain, especially in areas with high levels of impervious surfaces. Quadplex developments, even those under 1 acre, which would account for the bulk of our properties, increase impervious surfaces such as parking areas and driveways, contributing to runoff and flooding risks, issues already highlighted as vulnerabilities in southeast Ferndale. While developments under 1 acre may not trigger detailed county-level stormwater detention requirements, they are still subject to runoff management practices that rely on green stormwater infrastructure, like rain gardens, permeable pavements, and bioswales. Without proactive local oversight, these measures might not be uniformly applied, potentially exacerbating flooding in the neighborhoods already vulnerable to stormwater impacts. Additionally, while the Community Affordability and Inclusive Housing Action Plan emphasizes the importance of diverse housing options, it also prioritizes preserving existing housing stock and rehabilitating it to serve low-income and senior residents. Allowing quadplexes in the R1 zones risks incentivizing the placement of affordable single-family homes with higher density units that may not be attainable for lower-income residents. This could unintentionally accelerate displacement, particularly for long-term residents, seniors, and renters in these neighborhoods, counteracting the goal of fostering inclusivity. A more balanced approach might involve taking a half step by allowing duplexes in R1 zones. Duplexes provide an opportunity to gently increase density without dramatically altering the character of single-family neighborhoods or placing undue strain on infrastructure. Furthermore, this option aligns closely with the, I have to keep doing this, Community Affordability and Inclusive Housing Action Plan, emphasis on preserving and rehabilitating existing housing stock. Homeowners could be encouraged to convert part of their property into a duplex, allowing for multi-generational living or affordable rental options, while maintaining the footprint of existing homes and avoiding large-scale redevelopment that could lead to displacement. By considering duplexes as a moderated step toward increasing housing diversity, Ferndale could create a thoughtful balance between housing affordability, infrastructure capacity, and community character. This approach ensures that the city's long-term goals for sustainability and inclusivity remain front and center while responding pragmatically to housing needs. Paired with incentives for energy-efficient home rehabilitation and local stormwater management requirements, such as mandatory green stormwater infrastructure for all developments regardless of size, this strategy would uphold the spirit of the Community Affordable and Inclusive Housing Action Plan, while safeguarding the resilience and affordability of Ferndale's neighborhoods.
Thank you. Did we receive any phone calls leading up to the meeting?
I did not. No.
All right. If there are no further comments for the public hearing, seeing no one approaching, I will end the public hearing at 7:47. All right, well, we have quite a few items that we can address. I will start with the this recognition. I want to say before we kind of get into specific comments. One, are we leaving this video on, which we normally don't do for the Planning Commission, and is weirding me out?
Are you leaving the video on?
We had that on just for the public comment. I have messaged IT to go back to how we typically do it, which is just sharing.
It's either way, it's just new for me. Thank you. All right, well, first of all, I just want to celebrate the tremendous achievement getting to this point. As we said, it's been 19 months of a lot of work, a lot of edits to get to this point of editing or, well, totally revamping our zoning ordinance. It's kind of been a long time coming. It's coming off the tails of about 2 years of master planning process. So really 3 to 4 years of deep, intense work with the public. As we noted, dozens of public meetings. And so thank you to everyone, not just here tonight, but who's come to each of those meetings or any planning commission meeting, or the hundreds of comments we've received on Zone Ferndale and everyone that's been involved in this process. McKenna, our city staff has put a ton of work into this, so thank you very much, and great work. And I will just kind of start off with some of the public comments. So one, the Clear Vision Triangle, which Mr. Purdy noted. This is something that actually came to light to the city, and Roger may speak to it a bit more, having been closer to it, and it actually is it's kind of tangential to the process of our zoning ordinance, because there were a few incidences where folks, I believe, did get injured, or there were some close potential injuries with the growth of vegetation near a driveway kind of adjacent to the street. And so the clear vision triangle is meant to create a clear vision triangle at those potential inflection points. What it actually does not and is not intended to do is prevent growth in those areas, but just specific type. So I believe it is between a 36-inch and a specific, I don't know, the 5 feet or something. So it's, you can grow up to 36 inches, I believe, and then trees 8 feet? Oh, that's quite high. So we can maybe look at that or not. And obviously that's based on specifics, but thank you for bringing that up, Roger. So it is a specific clear vision so that as you're backing out, you can see over the growth or under the growth, and be able to see oncoming traffic, whether it be pedestrian, bicycle, or vehicular. And as I said, resulted from some actual incidences across I don't actually believe that you were particularly being targeted. I don't know that specifically, but I know that there's many properties around the city that have the same growth and issue that we're trying to address throughout the city. And so, Roger, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so I think it's important that the clear vision area is in our current code.
It's in our current code.
It's in our current code. So what it says is fences, walls, structures, or plantings shall not be permitted. Gets confusing now. Within 15 feet of any intersection of two streets or of a driveway or alley and a street. Shrubbery under 32 inches in height and trees with branches no lower than 8 feet above the street level are permitted. In the case of corner lots, a triangle area shall be kept unobstructed at each intersection. That triangle shall be a line connecting them at 10 feet. Generally, I think what it says for number 2 is, I believe the 15 feet is parallel to the sidewalk. It gets a little confusing.
Yeah, because it seems to me that graphic actually either isn't accurate or it should be maybe modified to include up to the pavement.
Yeah, I'm reading the old.
Gotcha.
So that was the old section. So I would say
Well, I'm looking at this graphic.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about this one. But I Googled while we were sitting here a couple different jurisdictions, and that would be Hazel Park. And I just want to read them so we understand where this comes from. Hazel Park, and it gets long. In order to provide an unobstructed view of an intersection, street, or sidewalk from a driveway or a street to a motorist, there shall be a triangle area, clear vision, formed by two intersecting streets or driveways and the street or sidewalk. This unobstructed area shall be the triangular section of land formed by two street curb lines and a line connecting them at 25 feet from the intersection. It talks about 30 inches to 8 feet. Madison Heights says the owner or person in charge or control of any lot or parcel of land within the city upon which any tree, shrub, vine growth, or plant may be standing adjacent to any public right-of-way shall trim or cause to be trimmed either at the property line or to a clear height of at least 8 feet above the surface of such public way, all branches unobstructed, thereby the vision of travelers along the streets. The city may enter and clean up the property to abate it. And then Southfield has a corner clearance and clear vision triangle that says in order to promote the safe movement of vehicles at or near the intersection and driveway connections, and in order to promote adequate protection of the safety of children, pedestrians, property, and other vehicles and occupants, no permanent or temporary fence, wall, shrubbery, sign, vehicle, or other obstruction to vision having height of 3 feet established grade shall be in the following locations. And within that is within the clear vision triangle, which is the triangle area formed at the intersection of any street right-of-way and driveway connection by a straight line drawn between said right-of-way. Very easy to read. And driveway connection at a distance along each right-of-way 10 feet. In almost every jurisdiction, there is clear vision triangles from street to street
And so this is more of something that's been around, but over the years with new increased motivation for planting natural, gosh, I don't know any of the words, but I do it myself. I have lavender in my front yard, but thankfully keep it nice and trim so it's clear vision. But because of this has become a newer issue that more people are kind of growing taller types of vegetation in their front yard. That has become an issue.
It is. So on the street, if you can barely see this graphic, this is street to street. And obviously you want the side triangle bigger because you have vehicles sometimes. You might have some things in there. You're driving maybe a couple miles per hour as you come through. You want to be able to see. So from street to street, it's a bigger triangle. From driveway to street, it's a smaller triangle.
And so that dark green should actually be to the street, not to that right-of-way line. I mean, because if you just had that cleared out,
this is supposed to be the sidewalk. I don't think this is. I think it's green. Is it green? Yeah, it looks like it's more greenery. I think this is actually the sidewalk, and this is the street. So it's your grass area.
But clearly, the intention isn't that you have a clear vision and then like vegetation that is in front of that. That would
below 30 inches, or ours might say 32.
Kids walking across the sidewalk.
Yes. So.
Now, with that said, a couple things have happened. I think Ferndale's been very progressive in allowing natural landscape, and my view of what I see is some people are purposely planting some things, and then some people are planting them and just letting them go. We don't have, cameras on everybody's property. We're not. We can't possibly catch every code enforcement issue. So historically, in the last couple of years, we've only been complaint-based, but I've been hearing it more and more from code enforcement of, hey, this one's getting out of control. It's not complaint-based, but I can see obstructing. Should I do something? And when there's so much to work to do, you can't catch everybody. But this year, we did have an issue. And I should say to the public, some people really enjoy it, and then we get the complaints. We're a community of 19,000 people. Some people don't like it, and they're getting pretty upset of why do I have to, slow down dramatically or feel like when I'm coming down a sidewalk, I'm going to hit something on the other side I don't see. So what people don't see is there's the other side of people who aren't happy with it. So we have to balance, as Michael said, it's not black and white, it's a little bit gray. But we did have an unfortunate incident on Marshall today where a young lady, I don't know how old, 5 years old, was riding down the sidewalk, and a person in their vehicle that had natural landscape, I believe, could not see, probably for a variety of reasons. I don't know, wasn't paying attention, maybe it wasn't as bad, but that contributed definitely to it and backed into the child. Parents not happy with it, obviously. It was an accident. No one meant to do it, as all of these things are. But we had to go on the street, and you can't go after one person. Right? It's not fair. You have to go over multiple. So we went to the 3 or 4 residents on West Marshall, west of Allen, and all were very receptive given the circumstances. But it's the end of the year. It was the end of summer. But one of the things for next year was we have to start enforcing. We're really not out there with tape measures. If it looks good enough and it looks like it's presentable enough, we're not going to go after you. But it grows too. 1 week it's not bad, a couple weeks later it is bad. Some people maintain it meticulously and cut it down and keep it low, and some don't. So I think this is one that we can look at other cities, maybe work with our traffic engineer. Maybe we can, and I say maybe it's recommended that, driveways be a little bit less, and intersections maintain a higher standard. Maybe 10 feet is too much. I think we can go to a couple properties and map out 10 feet and see what that looks like. But we all got to coexist. So, bicyclists, pedestrians, even vehicles have to coexist.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think to the point of, that many did not know about or hear about this, and that people are spending money on their property and don't want to, lose out on that. I think that I would ask the city to, make this some sort of public campaign to let people know that, this spring don't plant or terrible at gardening. I just called lavender, a natural habitat, but, so, making sure that people are aware so that we're not disrupting, and, potentially asking people to give up something that they've paid money on. So, but I think it's very important that we do maintain, and if we can, potentially, work with somebody to say that this is maybe a little bit conservative. I'm going to play the dad dead card, but my father was killed on a bicycle by a vehicle. It was not in this specific situation, but if we can prevent one of those, then I think it's every bit worth it. So
I think we can go out and measure a couple different yards. When you make rules, you make it for the whole city. There's no good ones. Some people will have 2 driveways and it impacts them more. Some have none. Why do they get to do it? It's just hard to make a rule for every circumstance. So we can try to see if we're a little conservative, but site triangles are important. Accidents do happen.
So it looks, so looking at I'm looking at the triangles, and so the triangle only exists between the driveway and the sidewalk. It does not exist. Let's say that you had a space of land between the road and the sidewalk. That I don't see that between the sidewalk and the road. I don't see.
yeah, I think this graphic is unclear on that, but that's the intention, is that piece between the sidewalk and the road be included in that as well.
That's a good point. I think in our natural landscape or ordinance, it actually mentions tree lawn somewhere. I looked it up a couple weeks ago. But yeah, if you have that strip, that doesn't mean that can have overgrowth and then past your house doesn't. So it applies to the strip as well. But the graphic does, I can understand it. We could clarify it.
I think we need to clarify that. Thank you. That resolve your question? No.
Another clarification I'd like to see here is that 306B2, it says 2 driveways. And then again, it says at the intersection of 2 driveways. And maybe I'm misinterpreting what a street is in this situation, but I think it should say like a driveway at street.
I think that was unclear as well. Thank you.
I think Michelle may have caught that in her review earlier. You were telling me.
Yeah, but I didn't mention it, so I'm glad he brought it up. So just that language just above there.
Yeah, I have that in my draft when I read it.
Okay. Thank you. Next, you can stay up because we have a question on the parking guidebook and how that will be.
That was the first one.
Administered.
This packet is the parking guidebook. This will have a cover sheet, kind of like our fee schedule does. We just didn't draft it yet. But here's the parking recommendations. Again, they're recommendations, but if you want to deviate from the recommendation, then you have to provide evidence and present it to staff and prove why you'd be less. And if staff feels uncomfortable, the Planning Commission will make the decision. But in here it talks about all the EV ready, the 3 different EV styles, and then the parking spaces. Recreation outdoor, 1 per 1,000. Community incubator kitchen, 1 per 3 people. So here are the parking regulations. And then where will they be? They'll be on our website. Kind of like everything else, how do people find out our fees? It's on our community development building website. Where do you find building permits? They're on our website. Sign permits, they're on our website. Anybody, so we'll try to make it as easily findable. The people that are only usually looking for this are developing something. They're rehabbing something, they're developing something. They're usually in the field, they're in this kind of field, so they know what a parking guidebook is. But in our pre-application conferences, we will tell them, we have a parking guidebook, it's on our website, we can send you a link.
Looking at this, I do question how not allowing parking minimums could affect accessibility, because it says, oh, you have to still follow ADA guidelines. ADA guidelines just tell you parking space sizes. They don't tell you parking space quantities.
That's in our code. I think it's 1 per 25 spaces, 1 per 20.
It is. It's 705.
But if you don't have 20 spaces.
But the thing is, if you can say, hey, I have this, this is based on intensity of use, and I'm expecting X amount of people inside my property. And that's what those parking limits are based off of. And so, and when we're saying we want one space of 25 spaces to be accessible, let's say Ferndale Foods decides that they only want to have 20 parking spaces, that means that they only are required to have one handicap space, even though the intensive use would probably be more than one person in that building who would be required to, who could need that handicap space.
The way that this is written in section 707 is barrier-free spaces cannot be waived as part of this. So let's say that the use requires 35 spaces. The applicant developer is still going to have to provide, which equates to 2 barrier-free spaces. They're still going to have to provide those on the site. There's no waiver from those standards.
So these are the standards per use.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be waived, but not the barrier-free.
Correct. It's still the same process that you're doing today with evaluating parking. It's just these are pulled off separate in a guidebook and given more flexibility for the community development department to review and to adjust if there are changes in best practices. But the ADA,
for instance, just to that point. So, for instance, because office space is a good example that's changed quite a lot over the years, and will probably continue to fluctuate. Whereas everyone used to go into the office, and then COVID hit, and then office, everyone was working from home, and now there might be like back to the office mandates, et cetera. That is a use that has kind of deviated. Is that kind of what we're looking for in terms of flexibility, or?
that could be a great example. Another one that I've seen a lot, especially recently, are more of like the high-tech users that are going into industrial facilities that need the actual space for like T&D, but don't actually have the number of engineers or staff to man that space. So a lot of ordinances don't equate to that. So they might say, oh, we need, 24,000 square feet of floor area, but we only have 8 employees at one given time. And for that user, then they would provide, this would allow them some flexibility. They would still be required to provide the minimum ADA.
Thank you for the clarification, the ADU.
I think maybe, because I'm trying to read this and trying to figure out ways to get around code. Looking at this.
As an architect does.
Yeah, and so I look at this and I say barrier-free spaces cannot be waived. Well, there's nothing being waived because this is a recommendation. I don't need to waive anything. I don't need to follow this. I don't need to waive anything. I'm saying that I need 10 spots and.
You don't have to do it. I just can't issue you a letter of parking sufficiency, and your application cannot move forward.
So the letter of parking sufficiency will have to be, and is, okay, so that's what you can hang your hat on that one. So the state.
Yeah, I have to issue that to move on to the planning process. If I feel uncomfortable, and it's hard because you know what your intent is. I guess I can't speak for a future CED director. But if someone has a request of 1 reduction, 1 space, 2 spaces, 20 to 18, probably not a problem. If someone comes to me and says, I don't need any parking, I want to build a 24,000 square foot industrial building, I don't need any parking, I'm not going to approve that. I'm going to say you need to go to the planning commission and approve that to them. I can't. Okay. That sounds way too much for me to do, and I can't face the backlash with that.
Okay, and because then maybe, I don't know, so because maybe then for the language of this number as a recommendation, maybe firm, this is not, make it seem a little bit less.
We can look at it. We'll look at that language.
Less floaty, because I just feel when I read that, I see this is a recommendation, and I read, oh, okay, so this isn't binding, and then I need to know what you would base it off of.
Let's review that to button that up and tighten it so it's not. Maybe there's a different word other than recommendation.
Yeah, and so to the point. And I'll talk about this probably a few times tonight, but I agree that we should tighten up the language specifically to the barrier-free spaces. But I did want to point out that in the intent section of 7.01, parking intent, the letter A speaks to pedestrian persons with disabilities access to provide safe, direct, and convenient facilities between all buildings, streets, and sidewalks and parking areas. So I like that we have the intent statement there and as a priority. so that the city and planning commission will have that that intention statement as a reviewing standards to make any waivers or requirements in the future. But to that effect, I think that we should probably also add that same language just in the, probably just like replicate it. If it's a standalone parking manual, just like replicate that information. And then we do speak to the uses, but I just wanted to make the general comment that, especially as we move to more of a form-based code and we're getting away from specific uses of buildings, but more about the form and intent and massing of a building in the area that it's in. We also want to make sure that we're designing for the future and not just a specific current use, because that can change over time. And, you know, I think office is a good example of changing needs, but I want to also be mindful if that changes from an office building to something else. We wanted to make sure that more so that the design of the building is in character with the neighborhood. And so really, I think that we should also add some language to that design, what is it called, parking design guidebook, around that. I think that the city already does this, but more so, I know one of the things that I've made a priority in the redesign of this this zoning ordinance rather, is to talk about the intention so that if we have staff turnover or this proves to be a really great ordinance that's around beyond the years of our existing staff, that future commissioners and staff can understand what we were hoping to achieve. Since we're spending a lot of time and effort on it, we want to make sure our intentions are clear. So I think just adding those intentions to that guidebook will assist with that.
We can definitely do that.
All right.
Double fencing?
Yes, that would be a great next one to address while you're up here. And I did want to,
Comments from the Commission on Parking?
we can also, yeah, if you have them right now.
It seems like every one of us happens to be parking.
Well, we can also open it up if anyone has anything, you know, if it comes to you in the process. But I do want to make sure we're addressing the public comments as well. So I do want to say with the double fencing, and I think you can speak to this further, but I did have a comment on it as well. Because I think that, again, kind of going back to what is the intent, we want to make sure that we're not creating like a haven or a run or playground for rats, rather. And I believe that's the intention between the double fence, which is a great intention. And I actually might be dealing with it on my property line as well. And so I'm also, you know, personally curious about how this is going to work. And so maybe, and I think that we can get creative with design. And so I don't want to box us into specific design standards to meet a particular intent, where we can maybe be more flexible in saying that this is the intent. I know it potentially makes it a little bit harder for compliance, but if I don't want to make it too hard for compliance, but maybe if there's some flexibility in the way that we word this, there might be some reason to relook at the drafted language that we saw in the presentation earlier, just so that, because it can be difficult. If you already have an existing fence, your neighbor's putting one in, that's an added cost that probably neither is intending to have to remove one fence or to deal with all the additional issues. So if there's, you know, potential ways around that, I want to make sure that we're addressing and being forward thinking about that.
So I think the idea is simply to force neighbors to talk with each other and plan it out. In new subdivisions, you know, Novi, North, usually you have an HOA, you're installing one fence now, you know, it's not really a problem for newer subdivisions. But obviously when Ferndale was built, there were no fences, and then people installed chain link fences, and now solid fences come into play. And so the idea is a couple things. Number one is, yeah, it becomes potentially a rat racetrack, burrowing area that you don't see, then you don't deal with the burrow area, or you can't get into the area. People don't mow it, so then it becomes long grass and all those things.
Or can't, yeah.
So what would be nice is, when we think typically, there's a chain link fence. If you want to install a solid fence, you go approach your neighbor. You say the city has a regulation, we can't do double fences. Are you good with me removing the chain link fence? And you install a solid fence. The problem is not all neighbors get along. I know you're shocked, but they don't. And so I would find that some neighbors, if you approach your neighbor, well, first off, you may not want to approach your neighbor. You have an issue, you've gotten police called, we're not going to make you approach your neighbor. Or you could approach your neighbor and say, the city requires me to remove that one fence, can I install another one? And your neighbor says, well, will that help you? And you say yes, and they say no, you can't. So that's why there's the good cause. So when people contact us to do a fence, we'd say, is there an existing fence there? You need to talk with your neighbor. If they come back to us and say, they won't let me, I don't want to make it sound easy that if the neighbor just says no, we'll grant it to you. But essentially, if they come back and say the neighbor won't let me, they want the chain link fence to remain, they paid for it a long time ago, we will, probably call that good cause. But I think if we make neighbors go talk, most of them will not build double fences. But there will be a 10-15% that still want to. This came from Councilor Mikulski, and I think she, wants to make it a hard rule. And I just think there's too many neighborhood problems to make it a hard and fast rule.
And in that language, it's my understanding that the nice side of the fence goes towards the outside.
Should.
Well, currently, I think that used to be the code many years ago. Maybe got changed or something. We don't have it now? It used to be a policy that Scott used to follow way back when or something. I can tell you my house has the non-flat side, just I can see the rails on my side. But it is written that the nice side, which I don't know what that side is, the flat side, has to go towards your neighbors or the right-of-way. Of course, if you do shadow box, both sides are nice, but you're talking about pickets with just 3 rails, visible. The 3 rails need to be inside to you.
It mentions that the finished side of any fence must face the exterior of the lot it's built on. That's what's in the proposed ordinance. So what that means is the fence on your neighbor's property is the non-conforming use. So you have to go to the section 16, which is non-conforming uses, which says if it was built during the days where it was non-conforming in the date that this was adopted, you're kind of SOL right now, but you have but if in case they ever have to repair more than 50% of the fence within a year, then you have recourse to say, no, you have to build it right at that point, from what I understand.
And I don't know the specific instance, but if you have the ugly side or if existing, and you talk with your neighbor or just go put it up, you probably can put pickets up on your side. There's just very nuanced to people's
in the
issues.
case that there is an existing fence, most people, such as myself, on my lot, there's an existing fence. I don't know who put it up there. My neighbors also don't. In those instances, for example, my neighbor actually approached me this summer and said, I'm thinking about putting it up. We're great neighbors. I love seeing her over the fence, and I'm actually a little bit sad that we won't be able to talk over the fence as much. But I also understand her, want for privacy in her backyard. And so in those instances, I think we would, figure out how to remove the fence so she could have hers. It would be the one. We would stand by the code. In less or ideal kind of situations, or I know fencing's actually can be quite expensive, and I don't know how much it costs to remove a fence, but I'm sure there's many extenuating circumstances that maybe it's left. And so if you're doing the waiver with the fence, then in this case, would my neighbor be putting pretty side out, the smooth side towards me, but is that chain link on my side or their side? Is that something that how do you figure that out? Is that
so specific to this case and that case and
it's
you're saying
kind of so
chain link is on
it depends on the property line.
Yeah, you're saying the chain link is essentially the property line. Your neighbor wants to install a fence. Which side goes which, and where does the fence go? Well, they can't install it on the other side of the chain link unless you agree to it because it's on your property. So it'd have to come inside the chain link, meaning they lose a little bit of land. right? If
This
there
is
was a
pretty. I used to see the chain link and all the vegetation in between it.
Yeah, then the fence itself, the nice side is on the outside. But what if both neighbors want to change the fence? Who gets the ugly side? Whims if I'm applying for it, and they'll figure it out.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
So I think your initial point is that this is a neighbor issue, and we hope that neighbors can make these decisions together. All right.
But there's an out if they can't.
Yes. I think that's also important. Especially since there's yes. Anyways. Food trucks. I think Michael brought up some great points. I think that in my 15 years in Ferndale, food trucks have been kind of debated and the business practices of them, and they've been changed over the years. I kind of agree with some of the points about, so it looks like, if my neighbor was having a backyard wedding and wanted to supply their guests with food truck fare, that they could have that food truck there for until 3 a.m. operating, and I'm not sure I would be too keen on that. So I think maybe we should kind of look at that language. And I am a little bit, I don't love to have business specifics in the zoning ordinance always. I think it can be tricky, but I think it's also necessary in certain points. So when we talk about the actual use of land, obviously it's a zoning issue. And so, how long can they stay? Where can they operate? I think that is a zoning issue. But that play between what are the specific, hours and all that can be a little bit hard in terms of where are we going to land those key regulations and the compliance of them. So I think I would just encourage us to maybe take a.
So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then Councilor Pollica had involvement in it. In the last couple of years, food trucks are proliferating around Ferndale, and I won't name specific spots, but Woodward Heights and Hilton, and 8 Mile there's 2, and West 9 Mile there's 1, and over on Academy and Woodward there's another one. And in most jurisdictions, you can be there temporarily and move, but some of them are just parking it and staying there. I think historically in a lot of communities, were concerned business owners. They have to pay for a building, they have to pay for bathrooms and insurance and all these things, and someone can come in at a much cheaper rate and take sales. I don't really see that here, and the business community has not complained. But I can tell you there's one on West 9 Mile that has put up a canopy and fake grass and chairs and tables and generator going, music going, and there's been a number of complaints about that. So when Laura showed the Planning Commission breakout, it missed a name there because Councilor Pollica was on it. But we broke out the Planning Commission into groups and had subsections to talk about. And Councilor Pollica got food trucks, to which we did a tour and drove around to each food truck. And they're site specific. One is on top of a brick wall, 10 feet from a home. And you can understand the person not wanting that. And then one is in an open parking lot. So they came up with, who else was on the?
Rachel.
Came up with the recommended regulations. And so I think Councilor Pollica can talk about his experience.
Well, yeah, so we developed what's in the plan now. So I'll give you an example. The one at Fair Street and 8 Mile, very similar to the one on 9 Mile. They have tables and chairs, they have planter boxes. They've basically parked a trailer and set up a business like a restaurant. But they're not required to put bathrooms. They're not required to make sure that the surface lot is taken care of. There's no assigned parking. So they're basically running a business, but not being required to meet any of the requirements of running a business. It's there all year long. So that concerns me. How often, I don't know how often they're being inspected, by the county. health department.
I think they get a 1-year permit.
1 year? So then you go to the one at the mobile station on Hilton, and again, you're adding another use to that property. It's a gas station, and it's taking up probably easily two and a half parking spaces. Where are these people parking? Are they just getting gas and running and grabbing something to eat? There is noise. Like it was said, the neighbor, I don't know if they have complained, but the next person that moves in the house may complain. So there's a variety. You mentioned the one on 9 Mile, the one at Woodward Heights and Barbecue Place. On Woodward Heights.
Woodward Heights in Gainsborough.
Gainsborough, thank you. Very similar to the one on 8 Mile. The one at the gas station, at the BP gas station on 8 Mile, very much like the mobile gas station. It's right there next to the front door, right on the edge of the driveway. Someone pulling in could easily hit someone coming out of the store. So you just have people using them on property that it wasn't designed for.
We talked about maybe it should be a minimum lot size. You have to be 10,000, 15,000 square feet. We talked about maybe it's just till 10 p.m. We talked about maybe they could park May to September and stay all there during that time, but then the rest of the year they got to go. We talked about Thursday through Sunday they could stay, but then, it's got to be temporary. You got to kind of move along.
Yeah. They were designed to be temporary. The food trucks, aren't designed to be, I'm going to open this permanent business on this spot forever, and create a whole restaurant type atmosphere, outdoor restaurant type atmosphere. That's
in the case of 9 Mile, where they actually did come in with very specific site plans to do just that. Fleet. Yeah.
Fleet, yes, yeah, but that was different, and yes, they're parked in a place that was designed for that business. Correct.
Which I think that actually, why are these cars?
You're kicking it underneath.
I think that really shows exactly, the difference between the intentions of, how to do food trucks and, what in a long-term business like Fleet who wants to incorporate that type of, a food truck into their business model, but they also provided the parking, the facilities, and have the standard business regulations that all the other restaurants have to comply with.
I think if they're going to be there a year, then they've got to have proper facilities, parking and all that other stuff.
I think it is important to know, Michael had mentioned this, that oftentimes these are new restaurant owners. They're trying to get their foot in the door. They might, oftentimes, could be immigrant population or, just folks that don't have the capacity to open up a restaurant. And I think that there should be opportunities for those types of businesses, but there is a threshold between that temporary into where a long-term, restaurant or other establishment is required. So
yeah, I think
it's very hard though to then regulate that.
It becomes really hard. I think every one of ours, maybe but one, is minority business owner. Racial equity and equity was part of the plan, so it's hard. It's just there's just one more every couple months. The hard part about 1 year or more, you have to say 1 year over 4 years or something, because they'll leave at 360 days and someone else will come for the next year. So it's hard to do it. So I don't know what wants to be done. If we want to do a tour, we can do a tour. If there's any recommendations, we can. If people want to think over the next week or two, this is probably the most confusing one. You feel bad, you want to support it, but you want to protect neighbors. And you don't want someone to pull in like the BP gas station. Someone pull in and people are out there ordering food and a truck comes in and hits a couple people. It's not going to be good.
I mean, today, what's stopping the corner of Bermuda and 9 Mile, the owner of that property leasing it out to 2, 3, 4 food trucks? just sitting there, and maybe they put up tables and chairs and have this own outdoor kind of restaurant. How does that impact the downtown businesses?
I can't think of the lot you're talking about.
We're right out here across from
Como's
Mezcal.
parking lot.
West of Mezcal.
Ah, gotcha. Well, so when we do site plan review for projects, we actually have stacking spaces, parking spaces, and identify where trucks can stack or sit, and that is part of, like, so in the, like when we talk about a gas station, if it's not identified that that's a stacking or parking space, then there shouldn't be a truck sitting
But
there.
I don't think in our current rules we review anything. I mean, the fire department reviews for fire. They have a fire extinguisher. They have things in place. Health department reviews. I don't know that we review much on private property. Correct, Michael? Not much. Under these rules, I think we do have outlined you have to stay out of loading areas and pedestrian areas. It's tighter under this.
So I think moving forward, prior to, maybe, do we want to put together a work group in the next couple weeks so that we can provide tightened regulations before the second reading? I'd be willing to meet.
I can get the bus. We can go for a bus ride around.
Oh, okay.
I can, again, but I figured other people might want to have an opportunity.
Okay. Let's coordinate that and see if we can get something. I think that just takes maybe another conversation.
And I mean, and I also would like to, when we do that, I would like to be part of it, because I do want to revisit the food truck thing. I have big issues with that.
Stormwater was mentioned, and I also had a question on that, just in terms of, I believe that they do, but, we talked about leading up to our zoning ordinance, we had our master plan, and that was a really great effort on the city of Ferndale, because we not only had the master plan, but a sustainability plan as well. And Oakland County was not necessarily part of that, but I do believe that they incorporate sustainability practices into their stormwater ordinance. And so I just wanted to verify, to make sure that there are like comps for any of their regulations to, so it's not so rigid, because I believe that our ordinance in the past has said, well, if you can do these green sustainable practices that create the same amount of, on-site storage or whatnot of water, et cetera, or prevent stormwater runoff, then you can supplement or rather do that instead of XYZ. So just taking that and putting it solely on Oakland County's regulations, I want to make sure that, and it was mentioned that we should probably go even farther beyond what Oakland County has. So I just want to bring that up, and maybe if you have any comments specifically on Oakland County stormwater.
Yeah, everything we do, or almost everything, may not seem like there's a process, but there is. So building a home comes through a building department. They review it for structural stamped architect drawings, etc. 1 in 2 family homes do not have to provide stormwater detention on site. The drainage plan is reviewed to make sure it's not angled so all the drainage is going to your neighbor. But overall, there's no on-site detention. They're exempt. Why they're exempt, I don't know. It's probably because, single family and duplex are common. There's still open space around, and it'd probably be burdensome to make people provide stormwater detention for a single family or duplex. But anything greater than that, 3 units, 4 units, 5 units, 6 units, when someone applies for a building permit, it gets routed to engineering to review the stormwater management. Just like it does, apartments get routed to the fire department, or larger developments get routed to fire department for fire lanes and sprinkler systems and all those things. We have multiple departments. We send it usually to the police department, sometimes for site plan review. Everything gets forwarded on. So Councilor Mikulski had, it came from a lot of people, had some concerns. So we wrote in there that 3plexes and 4plexes have to adhere to the Oakland County stormwater standards. Okay. nonchalantly being told it was somebody else. Councilor Pollica wanted that. My apologies. So we wrote in there, I wrote in my draft when reviewing it, we should, because it just says triplexes and quads.
Hey, Michael. Hey, can you hold on just for a second? Can we include you in that workshop on, okay, thank you. Sorry, I meant to say, and he reminded me as he left the room, that I would like to include Michael as part of the city staff to be included in that workshop that we have on
Food trucks.
yeah, that one.
So the section there talks about triplexes and quads is just a reference just for that. I think in my draft I wrote we should broaden it a little bit more so the public doesn't think that certain things don't, other things don't have to. It would say 3 units, 4 units, 5 and greater, and whatever the Oakland County rule is. There's rules about if you're disturbing like an acre or greater, you have to provide it. But I also think when it's an acre or less, they sometimes address it. We can have the we can talk with the city engineer about that and about coming to the next city council meeting to talk more about it. We had him at the last meeting, talked a couple minutes. We can prepare him a little bit better. Can we make Oakland County's rules stricter? I don't know. I can read to you Oakland County legal news in 2021. New stormwater engineering design standards announced for Oakland County. And the point of that is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, through the Michigan Department of Environmental, Great Lakes, and Energy, requires Oakland County and other regulated entities to comply with the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Phase 2 Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System permit requirements. The purpose of these standards is to address post-construction stormwater runoff required under this permit. It's meant to improve surface water quality, require volume-reducing, low-impact development measures, control both quality and quantity. So I don't know this. It might be federal regulations that then filter down to the county.
Makes me less secure about that with the incoming administration.
I'm not sure. Well, yeah.
Potentially, we can just add maybe we can just add some sort of like, again, like an intent statement that or something about also meeting, the city engineer guidelines. Just
we can add that. We can broaden it. I think we can also talk to the city engineer to have them come, because it's one of those things that we think the city doesn't plan for, it's not addressed, but he can speak a lot more intelligently to it at the next city council meeting, I hope.
Through the chair, I agree with you, Dominic. We need to have stronger requirements. My suggestion, though, is that we force Oakland County to make those changes, because we could do our little 3.9 square, miles of Ferndale, but I think the whole county needs to have new standards, because you have urban sprawl. And so you're having all this big development that keeps going out further and further, and they should be responsible for meeting the same requirements. So I suggest that you reach out to current resident, former mayor, current county commissioner, Dave Coulter, and start to push him to have better standards.
Yeah, it's a point. All of our systems upstream connect in downstream. Red Run, for example, all the communities pour in there. So if we lessen ours, but it's backing up to us and then water's coming down the drain,
we're a drop in the pond.
It's going to be very little.
That's a really great point. And we also have former city staff who are now working on some of their green regulations at the county.
Aaron?
Yes. So that's a great point. Yes, sometimes it's just nice to have a little fail-safe of, if administration changes, as does, and things happen at the county that aren't to our, quality standards, that we have some kind of fail-safe. So maybe there's some little.
Yeah, and we can have Scott here to give a little presentation on the regulations that recently came up. Maybe they're, for a 10-year storm versus a 100-year storm and belts and suspenders, I don't know. Maybe we can expand ours and do a little bit more now. Or maybe we can't. Maybe we're not allowed to. We're a consortium, and maybe the pressure is at Oakland County.
Mm-hmm. I would also, to the point of, it's always great to require and to encourage, but also I don't want to make development unaffordable at the same time. And so we have to also be cautious in what we're requiring. So I know that the county is obviously always considering that and taking that into consideration with their standards.
Yeah, one of the good things about the density is 1 and 2s don't have to provide storm detention, but at 3 you do have to provide it. So you are addressing it there, but then it does increase the cost of that type of housing.
Yeah. Well, I would say, actually piggybacking off of that to their, unless anyone else has anything on stormwater.
Through the chair, just one quick clarification. When you say it hits at 3, does that count for if it's a duplex with an ADU?
No. For the stormwater? Or for the unit count?
Yeah, how, I guess how is
I'll
the
get you
count
an answer
clarified?
because my conversation with the city engineer is he would look at an ADU as a garage, and so it would not be that for stormwater, but we will confirm.
Yeah, just so that's clarified in the ordinance.
I'll do that. His initial take was it's just like a garage and no, a duplex in a garage, we would not do stormwater.
You're already gonna have the same displacement of rainwater garage if you're just adding a second.
It was clarified.
We'll get an answer if we can ask Scott.
Thanks.
You have a quick-
Well, I
you
think
wanna
they
say
take in,
something?
yeah. I think they take into account the square footage.
You could have.
But it wouldn't be triggered until.
You would have an ADU and a garage.
Yeah, to Roger's point, well, I mean, we will confirm with the city engineer, but I mean, there's a lot of scenarios out there of someone having a single family and they want a duplex versus someone or they want an ADU, or someone who has a duplex and then they have an ADU. Maybe it's converting an existing garage, maybe it's a new build. So I think there might be scenarios where maybe there's an existing duplex and then they want to add an ADU. Perhaps that's the third unit and that triggers stormwater. That's something we'd have to confirm. But there are cases out there where perhaps it's an existing duplex, an existing garage, they want to convert it. There's nothing new being built on the site there. So that might be
I
grandfathered.
think ultimately it comes down to the amount of green space on a site. And that's gonna be the trigger. So whatever building growth is happening, if we have our thresholds for green space on the site, that controls. So,
Maybe it should be a combination of units and open space.
You should clarify it.
But I think adding the amount of open space, because if you have, well, and then it's hard to say, well, you do percentage or number of square feet, because from an equity standpoint of if you have a bigger lot, it's easier for you to not have to trigger runoff.
right, yeah, and that's, when you think about rainwater coming down on a building, what's coming off the roof and rolling onto the grass dissipates that. So if you've got less grass, that means the water moves faster to where it's hitting if it's not soaking into the ground. So ultimately, it's the green space that controls our stormwater management. So if you have less green space, that's when you have to do the underground. That's what really affects it.
But there's also there could be an argument that's made, though, that right now we're at a certain level. Even if, and that certain level is accounting for someone who already has that 10% of lot coverage and the extra 90% of green. And by requiring them to, and that's why I think it's based on a certain amount of acreage of site disturbance, which triggers that, because you're making what's already kind of an equilibrium, if you will, of worst condition.
I think site disturbance is essentially a good way to put it, and also a threshold of green space. Because even if you have, 3 units.
I would call it permeable or not.
Yeah. And then if you're increasing permeable past a certain threshold, for a certain number of units, because we currently don't require it, adding, but it's not just permeable, non-permeable, it's also like, well, existing permeable versus, So maybe we can just ask the city engineer to craft something potentially All right, anything else on the stormwater? To Greg's point about zooming out from our 3.9, I always round up to 4.
Yeah, it's 4. Yeah, well, it's 3.9.
Yeah, it is. All right.
Everybody says 4.
I think that it's important to look at the greater metro area, especially when we talk about housing and sustainability. So there are a few comments on residential and increasing density um, um, and kind of changing the character of our community, but also in reference to kind of sustainable financial sustainability, resiliency of our community, and affordability. And I know that as we talk about green space on our lot, it does help with stormwater, but actually that's a little microcosm. But if we look at this unsustainable development of single-family zoning and the inequity that provides for our greater metropolitan area, it's actually very unsustainable to have open space and to not build density, because then you have land use inefficiency with that low density development. You have more impervious surface, you have more pollution, you have less density that you have to have more vehicles. I mean, there's just so many other effects that our single family zoning creates less sustainable design and increases our energy consumption. It also increases the amount of infrastructure that we have to have compared to the number of people that we have. So also when we talk about fiscal sustainability, we have less people living in houses and potentially, bigger lots or, just as a single family. If we have more density, we have more folks in the density to provide more efficient use of services, infrastructure, have more folks to pay for that infrastructure. There's many benefits of density, and then including affordability, and just adding more units increases affordability of housing in general. So I think that we have to zoom out to see the bigger picture when we talk about these bigger systemic issues. And so when it comes to housing, I just wanted to mention that aspect of it and some of the reasons why we are talking about increasing density in the first place.
Agreed on that. And going back to the stormwater thing with the higher density, that's why it then triggers the appropriate stormwater scenarios on that site will contain whatever's happening on that site. But I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a burden on our public infrastructure if they're doing the right things on their property to detain stormwater. And so that's ultimately what the goal is of the stormwater on the property, is so it detains it before it goes into the public. We're doing the right things on each property, even the ones that become fourplexes, for example. Then it should not be a burden.
You can see the extreme example of that with Detroit and the less and less density that have the more and more inability they have to sustain infrastructure and have actually had to clear out neighborhoods. And I don't see that happening in Ferndale necessarily, but it's kind of the range of the impact that density can have. Okay, I apologize because it's nearly 9, but I have a few more things. I believe we did hit all of the questions and comments that we had from the public. So I apologize because I've been involved in this process for a long time, but yeah, I still have some comments on it. And I will just say to the point of, it is such a large document that it is quite difficult to digest, and so totally understand that how difficult it is, and so appreciate the engagement that everyone has. And so I know that we'll continue to have edits, as we've already talked about, that we'll have to continue this process and keep it an open document. But I just had a couple questions I thought would be good to talk about on the permitted uses section. Particularly, mostly on the industrial districts, where there are added uses from our previous ordinance that include retail and office that we formerly didn't allow industrial and are currently now allowing. I know folks that have been here long enough have heard me talk about this in the past on multiple occasions, that I believe that our industrial commerce is quite strong in Ferndale. There's always been a demand to an extent for those properties, and that if we create additional demand by allowing uses that might have a higher rate of return on that property for encouraging other development, that we potentially lose our industry and our ability to maintain some of our jobs in the area, potentially. And so I just wanted to mention and see if anyone else had any feedback on those uses.
Through the chair, I did have some similar comments when it was, this section was one that I went over. I think entertainment type with food. And I know there's a difference between, being a brewery or a distiller, or manufacturing something or turning it into a larger retail thing. So that might be a fine line, but yes, a lot of experiential retail. I know we had an event venue that came in that made sense in a way, but there was a lot of concern about public walkways or parking and travel in an area that was essentially industrial. So I do think that some things in here might not be as appropriate for the point that it might push out industry and jobs in that way. Office, outdoor, I don't know, outdoor dining, because I don't know if that's more towards mobile or, just where does it, is the definition clear enough that we know what to expect, or how broad that might be?
And bar as actually included. So brewery, distillery, winery, and bar are two separate uses, both permitted in both industrial zones, which I think brewery, distillery, winery certainly fits the intention of industrial, whereas bar doesn't necessarily, and has the same issues of, is there the appropriate infrastructure for those uses?
I'm very much against having anything that is a walkable business in an industrial area. Those spaces are not built for people. They're built for trucks driving by. There's not lit for people. There's not sidewalks. You're inviting people to walk along the street in a dark environment at night. So you have bar as a special land use, which seems ridiculous in an industrial area.
It's actually permitted.
I saw S, I1 and I2, bar. Commercial uses.
I must be looking at an older version.
I saw a special land use. I think childcare center in an industrial area. Community incubator kitchen that I don't feel like that's built around one specific project. Like anything where we're expecting there to be people, like full service restaurants, restaurant, cafe, takeaway. I don't want to start shoving a bunch of stuff into the industrial area that is not meant for people to walk. I mean, we're all about walkable communities, and these are not unless there's, but we just talked about our capital investment plan, and where funds are a little bit tight, and I don't think we have the funds to modernize the industrial area, install walkways and install proper lighting. And then also we'd have to make sure that there's enough police presence during after hours to patrol these areas. That's not what the industrial area is for in a community.
There's also additional pollution in industrial areas and greater truck traffic, and yeah, I think that the intention is for it to be an industrial zone versus a commercial or residential zone. So I agree.
It's not an aesthetic. It's not like the industrial aesthetic. This is an industrial use, not to have a fun little space to go to pretend you're swinging a hammer.
Through
the chair, I guess from my perspective, a lot of this you're talking about light industrial. And I think it really pertains to the Woodward Heights Hilton overlay. not necessarily, you know, deep within the industrial area.
That's not clarified in that. I know I-1 is I mean, but.
Well, I think that's why most of it's special land use, because it would be up to us to determine whether or not we wanted to allow it, you know? Maybe it's only the building inside, the side street, as opposed to right on Hilton or right on Woodward Heights.
I think the overlay actually speaks only to the design of the building versus the use.
Through the chair, that is correct. Chair Foster's right. So we don't have a differentiation in uses for
Potentially
the
that's why
Woodward
the
Heights
issue.
overlay. So if you're I-1 in the Woodward Heights overlay, that could affect like your building design, and you could have some form-based requirements, a little more window frontage and stuff like that because you're going along Woodward Heights and Hilton.
Okay.
But there's not a different list of uses for those types of businesses.
Essentially, that's why there's the issue too, because maybe we're looking more, and there's a broader array, thinking of those
Yeah.
road face or like corridor facing lots versus, so.
I mean, you wouldn't have Subway, you wouldn't, well, I know that Subway's not desirable, but, there's, a restaurant purpose. You wouldn't have urban
rest.
Thank you. You wouldn't have urban rest, in that location. There's just, there's a number of things that if you're just saying no to industrial, wouldn't have those border areas. And again, I think they're all special land use. We can determine if it comes to us, whether or not we want to approve it.
Through the chair, a number of things still that are permitted here and kind of along the lines of uses, retail sale establishment and theater entertainment value, those are both permitted in both industrial and spinning off on that a bit. At one point, history of we had identified or defined a large retail and a small retail, and at some point we had a cutoff because if there's larger lots or properties available, then we might be looking at a big box scenario, which in some cases can support the city by making things more convenient, or it might support regional. But I think Ferndale as a character was always thinking big boxes were not something desirable just within the smallness of our city. So by allowing retail sale establishment in both of those, it could be much bigger and different than we might think of Ferndale's character. So in that case, also along retail, not as long ago, we were looking at if an industrial area was constructing something, what portion of their area could be retail, so that it didn't become overall retail. So to me, it's a little bit unresolved, like how much retail do we want? How might we get a good balance for that and not find something coming in saying it's permitted. I've bought up this available area, and some of the industrial facilities are large, and replacing it with something like a big box. Putting that out for thought.
And I don't have a problem with more special land uses, but so we can make a decision on the fly, so we can make a decision based on. But I just don't want there to be a bunch of area just to have a high intensity use where we have a ton of cars now driving and dodging semis down these areas. I mean, I don't know how much semi traffic there is, but
I think relying on special land uses can be tricky as well, because there's specific standards that we're looking at, and I don't want to open the city up to litigation for us to say, well, we're going to allow it on this lot, but not that lot. And I think that we do a good job of specifying those reasons and particular to circulation, et cetera, and that's not arbitrary. But I do hesitate to rely on that too much if there are certain uses that we do not think that should be in the outlet. And I mean, it's kind of clear, like even if you look at schedule of permitted uses. There's residential uses, public uses, commercial uses, and then industrial uses. And outside of the industrial uses, there's quite a few permitted uses that, are outside of that traditional industrial use subsection.
I think of it as, like if someone were asking for a rezoning, one of the questions we say is there anywhere else available to do that before considering this? And that really question comes to mind. If someone wants to put a theater entertainment value there, I would ask, is there any other district in the city where that use would be more appropriate? So that's kind of how I'm seeing, what I think might fit there versus what might be better suited somewhere else, and not have as much impact on the intended area that that's zoned for.
If we want, if we want to change what industrial means, and change the industrial district and deal with the ramifications of doing that instead of, it feels kind of like a backdoor way of making this a mixed use district, like a light mixed use.
Yeah.
Through the chair, I think this is all really good feedback. And, I see a very big difference between our light industrial district and our, it's not called heavy, but true industrial district. Just, in terms of like its built form and everything about it. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, Roger, but I think we can review some of these uses and maybe what I would say is potentially eliminate a number of them from I-2, and then for I-1 consider either elimination or elevating to a special land use. So I'm hearing a lot of things that are specifically non-industrial oriented, like bars, restaurants, office, retail, things of that nature. Maybe event venues kind of questionable, childcare. It does sound like there is some support for brewery, distillery, winery, and roasteries, with the understanding that those generally attract people also.
Well, and I mean, if it's, and also like if this is I know we discussed this about a year and a half ago. This kind of was brought in during, I think, a lot of the marijuana discussions on how we want to, and I'm always.
I have a point about that as well.
I'm always surprised that we're always trying to put a bunch of potentially intoxicated people in the middle of an industrial area. But I said but yeah, when we talked about that, we were talking about like if there's uses like that might be light, it might be a retail that is being served by the industrial that happens on site. So if there's a small retail, but they do something big industrial on site, and they have like an incidental use of retail off of the main use of industrial, then I don't have as much of an issue. Or incidental use of dining off of a main brewery, then I don't have as much of an issue with that as much as I do just allowing a bar there.
Yeah, I think to me, there's, several factors for wanting to maintain industrial uses. One being that the area is designed for industrial, and as the many points that we've already talked about, and also already stated, but I think that it's also important to, as Commissioner Azar said, that if there's no other place, then where is it to go? And I think that we need to allow for the space for the industrial, and I think that there's certain uses that property owners might want to convert to a use that might bring in more money potentially, but that then leaves us without the opportunity for industrial space that, creates jobs and others. But so I think there's just many reasons. So thank you for taking another look. And I think that, as we've already stated, this is an open document, and I think that if we need to continue to make changes, that we need to do so. But we appreciate you taking a review before it goes to the City Council. kind of the opposite of that, and that Commissioner Showalter just said that marijuana provisioning centers and what's the other technical term? The recreational facility, those are actually more of a retail or commercial use, and I know that we've identified in the past that they go in industrial, or they currently are. Also, though, did notice maybe a new one on Woodward, which surprise?
That's in Pleasant Ridge.
Ah, gotcha. Well, to me, that actually made more sense, that it would be in a more commercial space where we have commercial retail establishments. And so I would think that we would expand, and I know there's been several conversations outside the Planning Commission at City Council that may have prevented that, but I think from the Planning Commission perspective, we've had many it's getting late. Conversations on our end that makes more sense in a more commercial area. And I will say so to City Council, I guess. Anything else on the table of uses? Just, I think one thing, as we kind of mentioned, living document in our schedule of regulations, which is next, I am concerned about the potential for, I don't think that economics make sense right now, but potentially down the road for people to combine lots and to make bigger houses, and I don't think that's our intention of the changes of our ordinance, but I also don't think we prevent that. And so I'm not sure if we need to have a maximum lot size or how to do that, but personally concerned about, creating, more bigger houses, mega houses that actually go against the intention of creating more density and keeping our smaller housing character intact at the same time. It's just fun. So I just want to mention, maybe that's something that if we see that continues to be an issue, that we look at it. I'm not sure if it's something we need to address, but want to state. And so if anyone knows how other communities may have tackled that, I would love to hear if you have anything. Sorry, I have a couple more things. Design standards, I just wanted to, and I can provide language, but identify, I think, again, going back to the intent and making sure our intentions are stated really clearly. When it comes to the design standards, I would love to see language in there that talks about our intention for durable, sustainable products. Because we identify, I can't find this. Which section is this? Or, so we talk about very specific building material standards of masonry, concrete, and we're kind of like superficially identifying what we want in terms of, well, we want a durable product that's going to last, it's going to, maintain throughout the years and have a lifespan. But I think we should just state that as well, because as new materials are developed, I think it'll be more flexible to state, well, our intentions are to have a durable product that's potentially locally sourced or recycled, energy efficient, et cetera, to let folks know that's what we're looking at and have a little bit more flexibility for our developers, but more intense for our staff. Anyone agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, definitely agree.
Okay, so I would encourage us to add something like that prior to going to the City Council for the second reading. Similarly, well, just in terms of the Article 4 intent statements, to add a statement about accessibility specifically and sustainability, just to add those. I think that generally it's already stated in our zoning ordinance, but specifically for Article 4, architectural and design standards, we should state specifically about sustainable and accessibility. That we want to create those, promote. Very nitpicky. I don't know if this needs to be stated on the record, but in our lighting standards, 25-foot light poles in industrial, before we had a statement that said if you're so close to a residential, that would be a lower standard. So we don't have a tall light pole, if we could just include that. Computer stopped working. And in the general intent statement, sorry, obviously a very big thing of mine is the intention of this ordinance. I think it just helps so much for everyone. So I had some like maybe wordsmithing of our intent statements in section 103, scope, purpose, and title of the ordinance. That just include more, again, resilience, inclusive, accessible, sustainable development. I think those are probably things that we can just include in the, I want it to state because they're pretty high up in the ranking of, intention of the ordinance, but I think I can probably provide that, and the city staff agrees with some of that wording that I think probably everyone would agree to. I don't need to go through the specifics now, but want to bring it to everyone's attention. All right. Anyone have anything? All right. Well, again, I think we'll all probably have edits in the near future. Even as someone who is a zoning nerd, loves this, was on the committee and is on the planning commission. It's taken me a long time to get through the ordinance, and so apologies for some last minute stuff. But I think that's, something that we're going to continue to see as we dig through this. And so I hope that the residents and anyone listening in the public understands that as they see things, they can come to us as well, that this is a living document, so.
Something I was thinking about earlier when we were discussing fences, more of a discussion, do you think it's something we should put in or not? And that doesn't mention anything about maintaining and upkeep of the fences and.
Oh, I think there is.
It says somewhere like materials have to be good, but also in our property maintenance code, which is the adopted property maintenance code.
It's just a broad, as long as because I walk by some fences that are like about at 1 o'clock instead of at noon, so.
Don't send us the addresses, we're gonna have to.
Yeah, it's page 23, it references the.
Okay, great.
Anything else from anyone before it moves forward to city council? And if not, we do actually are asked for a motion to city council.
Yeah, what's the council meeting, December 10th? What did that say?
25th, November.
December 25th? No, the one after that.
Oh.
16th. 16th, okay, so December 16th, the packet goes out the 12th, and I'm sure Laura would like it before the 12th, right? So you would like all comments, final call, no more comments after, what are we thinking? Okay. Which, most of you have Thursday and Friday off next week, so that gives you plenty of time. So we would like all comments by 5 p.m. December 2nd. How's that? 5 p.m. December 2nd. This is my 6th review. You'll always find a little bit of stuff, but we will remind you, we'll send maybe a calendar invite, remind you if we can get all comments. After that, she needs time to correct them. One last review, get all the numbers and formatting correct, and get it in the packet.
And I've already said this like 5 times, but all comments for that version that the city council will vote on, but is a living, breathing document that we will continue to review comments and edits and update as applicable.
Yeah, so the draft you see today is in Granicus to be uploaded tomorrow. So we can't make any changes for that.
Yeah.
Upload tomorrow for Monday. So that will stay the same on Monday. But we have this rolling list. And when you make a motion, if you can make a motion giving staff the allowance to make non-substantive changes, then I think we have a little bit of freedom to wordsmith a little bit of stuff.
Through the chair, I just realized I was sent a letter from a resident regarding tonight's Planning Commission discussion on the zoning. May I be allowed to read it now? Okay. I'm sending this to you because I know you are involved with the Planning Commission. I won't be able to attend the meeting this evening, but I wanted to share some thoughts on the proposed zoning changes. I live on, I'm just going to say Pinecrest. To paraphrase ideas memorialized by Jane Jacobs, great cities require a combination of mixed-use development, density, old and new buildings, and short streets. While I'm encouraged at some of the changes with the proposal, with respect to gently increasing density allowed in R1, R2 areas, ultimately I'm disappointed and don't feel the changes go far enough to enable a foundation for financial resilience and vibrancy, specifically as it relates to mixed-use zoning and parking minimums. I would love to see R1 and R2 combined and merged to create another level of mixed-use development, allowing neighborhood grocery stores, coffee shops, galleries, cafes, retail locations, etc. Climate change and affordable housing can both be addressed by removing dependency on cars, something entirely within the city's ability to control through zoning laws. Requiring a parking study and CED approval to deviate from minimum parking recommendations is a de facto minimum parking requirement and puts artificial requirements on developers and business owners deciding what is right for their customers. I urge the Planning Commission and Council to consider eliminating parking requirements citywide and adopting light mixed-use zoning throughout our R1 and R2 neighborhoods. Consider instead frontage zoning, which would limit the width of developments to existing lot sizes in lieu of use-based zoning. This would prevent character-changing developments while opening opportunities for the community. Thank you for your time, Jack Jacobs.
You just sent it to Jane.
Yeah, I don't know what the relationship is.
That would be fun. Thank you for that.
Yep, thank you.
I think that we've had, conversations along those lines, and I appreciate the feedback. I agree with the parking sentiment, and I think that this is, what we have here is great step in the right direction, and certainly a compromise between a lot of opposing opinions on many matters, such as housing density and distribution of uses, and I think that we've come up with a great plan over the past 19 months for zoning and 2 years of planning that we've come. So, but we will continue to make improvements as we go. All right. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at you. So, with that, do we have any continued questions for the city or our planner before we make a recommendation to the city council? If not, I would, whatever emotion, whatever the word is that I'm looking for. Thank you. Entertain a motion.
Discussion on the potential motion.
Yeah.
So we're saying to approve and recommend this as what we have right in front of us, but we also have made a ton of different kind of suggestions and changes. So how does that?
I think we make a recommendation as Roger and Kyle alluded to give staff ability to make substantive changes. And I guess the more substantive ones that
Will be presented to council. We'll probably do a slide on Monday. That'll spell out the things that you guys recommend. It won't be in the code, but we'll spell them out like we did here of all the substantive changes so they know going into it.
So I think that we could do it a couple different ways. One being that we have a general statement that there are changes, not substantive changes made by cities. Well, that staff makes the changes as directed by the Planning Commission to continue the process based on our discussion, or if there are any specific recommendations that we want to make sure that are part of any conditions of that motion for City Council to entertain, then we would add those Yeah. So I think we've all been pretty clear. I've taken notes. I think staff has taken notes. We're recorded and,
Yeah, so Planning Commission recommends council approve the, zoning code, subject to staff presenting the recommended changes at their meeting and staff being allowed to make non-substantive changes. I think covers that.
whoever's the least tired. And if you're comfortable, go ahead.
Sorry, make a motion that Planning Commission recommends the approval of the draft zoning ordinance to City Council based on, including comments noted this evening, and based on staff being able to make non-substantive changes to the language as needed.
Motion by Brazen. Do I have a second?
Or
Support by Showalter. I'll take over. Any discussion on the motion?
Through the chair, the motion didn't call the date of the, but because it's in the draft, suggested action, so
On the draft motion? I missed that.
It was exactly what she said, but it had a date in it, so I just wonder if we want to note which edit we're looking at.
We'll amend the motion to include draft version V.6, November 1st, 2024.
I support that amendment.
All right, any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll have a roll call vote.
That will be me. Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
Commissioner Azar?
Yes.
Commissioner Brazen?
Yes.
Commissioner Moshelli? Councilor Polika?
Yes.
Showalter, what's the? Vice Chair Showalter?
Yes.
And Chair Foster?
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you so much for all of your work. I know it's a long road, so congratulations.
I just want to say thank you to a couple people, if I may. I'd be remiss if I did not thank Laura for all her work in putting up with Kyle. It was a lot, so we appreciate that.
It is so difficult.
We appreciate what you did. Thank you so much. Of course, to Kyle and Christine, because without them, this would not be possible. They put a lot of work in. Thank you to the steering committee members. They gave hours and hours of time. Thank you for the planning commission for breaking off and meeting all of us. And then thank you for Mayor Raylon Leaks-May and Mayor Pro Tem Mikulski and Councilor Johnson and Councilor Kelly and Councilor Polika for the work they've put in so far. It really has been long. I don't think Kyle wants to do it anymore. I think he wants to close this up and start implementing. So
Don't go into real estate like Justin. You gotta.
So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Roger. You've put in a lot of work as well, and so we appreciate it. Thank you to everyone. So next on our agenda, we have administrative items, including consideration of approval of the 2025 Planning Commission meeting calendar.
It is that time of year. So we are required, as all boards and commissions are, to adopt a meeting calendar for the next year. We have toyed with the idea of going down to 1 month, or 1 meeting per month. I have looked around. Most other communities around us meet once per month. Given our rate of cancellations, I think we average out to meeting more often once per month. So that is my recommendation. So I provided the calendar for us to meet on the 3rd Wednesday of every month through 2025. We do have an alternate calendar showing what we do now with 2 meetings per month. But I'd be happy to discuss anything further.
that might help discussion as we talk about dates moving forward. I know that we have one seat open right now, and there were some members that were potentially rolling off. I don't believe that anyone was planning on it, so are we just looking at potentially one person that will have a opinion on our dates, which means that they don't get an opinion?
Yeah, I mean, we just have the,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I think that the recommendation to move to one is fitting to your points of we've averaged one a month, and it might be easier to potentially schedule and say, well, this is when the planning commission meets. It gives the developers a little bit more, it gives them a little bit less flexibility, but also helps, I think, everybody else in identifying times that we can meet. I think we've had some issues. Certainly helps my travel schedule.
Yeah, I do think the rigidity actually does help a little bit instead of just kind of saying, yeah, well, it's sort of in 2 weeks and this one's sort of coming up. If we have this definitive once a month, I do think this would be helpful, frankly.
Thank you for reframing that. Yes, that's what I meant. Anyone object to one a month? Do we want to stick with the first Wednesday? Or you suggested the third Wednesday? I'm just seeing on your calendar here.
I recommended the third Wednesday just because sometimes
so many holidays come at the first, like 4th of July and Labor Day, and you know.
What about the second? Is that totally throwing everyone for them? I just know that I have a lot of conflicts on the third week.
My question is, how does this correlate to the city council meetings? Because usually we provide an approval, and so would it be another 2 weeks after these before the next city council meeting?
City council meetings are on the 2nd and 4th Monday of every month.
So then it would be 4 days later, however many, a few days later, okay.
Well, yeah, like today, Monday is a council meeting. So, but it also depends on when the day of the month starts.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to move? We still have another meeting next month, correct? Potentially. Potentially.
yes, I mean, we have items for the 4th, our next meeting.
Well, how about we move forward with the once a month, and if anyone has suggestions on changing the day from the third Wednesday of each month, that we submit them to Kyle, and then we'll review that at our next meeting. That work?
Okay.
Thank
to be
you.
clear, I mean, the clerks do want something from us tonight.
Well, let's do this. Adopt the third Wednesday of each month, once a month, and then if we have any edits to that, is it possible to edit after we've submitted?
Yes, it is. They might not be happy with me, but I do think it is possible, yes.
Okay.
Through the chair, does this require a motion?
Yes.
Okay. Would you prefer that we take a moment to actually debate that? Because I just know it's 9:30 and probably people don't want to.
I mean, yes, I think we do want this ironed out a little bit. So I did go with the third just because, I mean, that's what we're all used to. We've all.
Looking at I know the
yeah.
Chair Foster suggested the second, and it doesn't look like there's the second Wednesday has any real conflicts with any holidays next year.
Are there
We do have a cultural holiday, which does not show, city official holidays that we've been getting, which I don't have in front of me. So, I mean, I ran this calendar by that as well.
I just know I have at least 2 conflicts, and knowing those off the top of my head probably means that that's only a small percentage of my actual conflicts on the third Thursday, Wednesday. But if everyone else can meet, I can try and minimize those conflicts. And
Chair, are there other city activities that would conflict, or that the third Wednesday is better for?
No, I mean, I think we've got the third Wednesday secured on our own. So I can't speak to if we were to try to change it to a second Wednesday. I don't know what that looks like off the top of my head.
I know Parks and Rec meets on a Wednesday, but I think the first Wednesday.
Yeah, I think we share a date with them, but they're at Incubizo.
Yeah, but they're at the, yeah, but they're still, if there's a conflict, like I want to go to the Parks and Rec, I mean, it's on the first Wednesday, I think.
Yeah, Roger's noted. I mean, sometimes we have Fern and Learn. We have other Wednesday night things that we pick on a second Wednesday of the month.
Fern and Learn was like on a Tuesday or a Thursday.
I don't have an opinion. I could do second or third. I don't care.
All right, well, if you can do it, and I can actually, I just went through my calendar. I only have 2 official already. So if Vice Chair can cover for me, then let's stick with the third Wednesday.
Still, any Krieger projects, they have to.
That they can't go in March or September.
I am curious, with passing the new zoning, would we expect to have a lot more activity? You know, are there a lot of projects like waiting in limbo, just waiting for us to publish this so that they can like, boom, get on the move? I know of a couple businesses, but I don't know if there's, you know, a lot.
I mean, unless Roger disagrees, I don't think there's going to be a mad rush per se. Yeah, and it does allow for some more admin review. So there are, you know, potentially some projects that
Hopefully not a mad rush.
might not. Yeah, so there could be some projects that traditionally would have come here, but through new regulations may not. So keep that in mind too.
That's a good point. Another reason to move to the schedule. All right, well, if anyone would like to make a motion.
I'd like to move to accept the proposed agenda for meeting dates for 2024 as provided in the packet.
There were 2 different, so if you.
The monthly meeting.
Thank you.
Through the chair, can I interject? Can you say perhaps like once a month? Is they're all monthly?
A little more clear?
Yep. I move that we accept the once a month planning commission meeting dates as provided in the meeting packet.
Second that.
Motion by Michele, second by Showalter. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, commission items.
Oh, yeah, we have one more administrative item.
Oh, sorry, administrative item.
I know you all want to go home, but this is kind of a big deal. So I have accepted a position with the city of Fort Worth in Texas. So I will be leaving here in a couple weeks. So my last planning commission meeting will be Wednesday, December 4th. So my time here has been great. I've really appreciated it. I've really learned a lot. So I'm sad to go, but you'll see me again.
Okay, well, congratulations, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And thank you for all of your hard work and support and
thank you.
Great planning. And we will miss you as well.
Thank you.
I'd also like to add that Christine is the recipient of Employee of the Year through the Elks for City Hall Employee of the Year.
Congratulations.
Well deserved.
Thank you.
I assume that you'll update us if there are any changes to the department as we move forward after the failing of the Hadley override. Okay. Any commission items? All right, well, with that, thank you, everyone, and we will adjourn of November 20th at 9:33 p.m. Thank you.